governors from different provinces, Honorable Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, who is our host this morning, Deputy Governor and board members from the National Bank of Rwanda, Board of Directors, CEOs, and MDs from the financial sector, senior government officials present, development partners, representatives from the private sector, media partners, and those following us online, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. On behalf of the Honorable Governor and the entire leadership of the National Bank of Rwanda, I warmly welcome you to this March 2026 Monetary Policy and Financial Stability Statement. Your presence underscores the importance of this engagement in shaping our country's economic direction. Thank you for making the time for this important conversation. My name is Doreen Makumi. I work for the National Bank of Rwanda as Director, Communication and Engagement, and for this morning, I'll be your MC. Ladies and gentlemen, today's statement comes at a time of heightened uncertainty in the global economy. At a moment like this, stakeholders like you are not just looking for the data. They are looking for something more than that. They are looking for clarity, direction, and confidence that our institutions remain alert and forward-looking. Against this backdrop, the statement that the governor is going to give shortly is a public commitment to transparency, explaining how the National Bank of Rwanda interprets current developments, the risks it sees, and how it intends to act to safeguard price stability and the resilience of our financial sector. As you listen to the governor's presentation, I invite you to reflect on three questions. One, how is Rwanda positioned in an environment of renewed global uncertainty? Two, how will monetary policy respond if external risks materialize? And three, what does the strength of our financial sector mean for the real economy and for the ordinary Rwandan? Distinguished guests, it is now my honor and privilege to invite the Honorable Governor to deliver her presentation. With a round of applause, please join me in welcoming the Governor.
Honorable members of Parliament, both chambers, Honorable Chief Ombudsman, Honorable Governors of Rwanda's provinces, Honorable Deputy Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, board members of the National Bank of Rwanda, Commissioner General of the Rwanda Revenue Authority, senior government officials, Chairperson of the Private Sector Federation, Chairpersons of our financial institutions, CEOs and MDs, development partners, members of academia, members of the press, and dear students here present, and colleagues, good morning. Mwaramutse neza. A warm welcome to this first Monetary Policy and Financial Stability Statement of 2026. To participants joining us online, we welcome you too. Today's statement is grounded in the National Bank of Rwanda's core mandate to first maintain price stability and second, to promote a sound and inclusive financial system. These are critical foundations for a resilient, growing economy and for a trusted financial system. We meet at a time when the global economic environment is marked by elevated uncertainties. In particular, geopolitical tensions, volatile stock markets, and commodity markets. These developments continue to shape global and domestic inflation dynamics, financial conditions, and growth prospects around the world and in Rwanda. A question we've asked ourselves is whether, as central bank, we still need a monetary policy and financial stability statement every 6 months, when we have ever-changing geopolitical events and trade policies coupled to real-time economic and financial data. We do not yet have a definitive answer, hence why I'm here. But nevertheless, in this MPFSS of March 2026, we will present economic and financial developments for the whole year of 2025 and provide an outlook for 2026 and the medium term. The MPFSS is not only a statutory requirement, but an essential tool for transparent and responsive policymaking. Indeed, the central bank issues monetary policy and financial stability statements twice a year to communicate developments in the global and domestic economy, as well as the rationale for our monetary policy decisions. The statement also highlights the performance of the financial sector. It evaluates stability indicators as well as risk within the financial system, and it demonstrates the central bank's measures to address potential risks and challenges. The monetary policy and financial stability statement, therefore, still supports macroeconomic stability, guides market expectations, and reinforces confidence in the economy and our financial sector. And having set the scene, especially for our guests who are attending the MPFSS for the first time, let me begin by presenting the key developments of the global economy and Rwanda's economy in 2025. First, the global economic environment today faces increased uncertainties due to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. The conflict has triggered sharp increases in global oil prices and poses significant risks to Rwanda's inflation and external trade. Preliminary analysis that we have done indicates that there are heightened disruptions to global oil and gas flows via the Strait of Hormuz, which have led to significant surge in energy prices, as you've read in the press over the last 3 weeks. For instance, when we look at the price of oil, the Brent crude oil price has increased by 43% since the 28th of February, rising from $72 to $103 yesterday. And prices of natural gas have also increased even more by 64% since the start of the conflict in the Middle East. That is from $32 to $52 per megawatt hour. So the volatility that we see of commodity prices points to elevated risk to global inflation and a potential slowdown in economic activity if the conflict persists in the second quarter of this year. So due to this uncertain environment, we expect a revision of global GDP growth forecast. Indeed, global GDP growth was projected to stabilize at 3.3% for this year and stand at 3.2% in 2027. That was according to the IMF's World Economic Outlook report of January 2026, but now new forecasts are expected next month in April. Global inflation was also projected to continue easing, falling to 3.8% in 2026, and again easing to 3.4% in 2027. And this was due to tight central bank policies, but also easing global commodity prices, which were projected to contribute to this continued decline in inflation. But again, these forecasts are likely to change. We had observed at the beginning of the year that the energy index, which incorporates prices of crude oil, as well as natural gas and coal, was projected to decline by 10.2% in 2026, and again rising by 6.2% in 2027. For instance, crude oil prices were expected to decrease by an average of 8.5% this year and expected to increase actually in 2027 by 8.3%. However, the ongoing conflict involving the US-Israel war against Iran has significantly disrupted oil markets, leading to higher prices and increasing upside risk to global inflation should these disruptions persist. And as I mentioned earlier, when we look from the beginning of the year, meaning from January 2026, we can see that crude oil prices had been on an upside trend. And if we take the price increase from January to yesterday, 17th of March, there was a price increase of 72% in Brent oil prices. And for natural gas prices, these prices rose by 64% again in less than a month. The non-energy index, which incorporates food commodities, was also expected to slightly reduce in 2026, with global food prices expected to decline slightly by 0.3% and rise slightly by 0.8% in 2027. But this increase in commodity prices overall, for commodities also such as coffee or minerals, support Rwanda's exports earnings, as we will see in a moment. The increase in metal and minerals prices is due to high demand from electronics and the technology companies globally. From the global economy, we move on to the performance of Rwanda's economy in 2025, starting with developments of our external sector. Rwanda's international trade performance was strong in 2025, reflecting efforts made in increasing exports and implementing the national industrial policy. Merchandise exports were up by 11.4%. Imports expanded slightly by 5.8%, making our trade deficit marginally increase by 2.5%. The imports growth is due mainly to consumer goods such as cooking oil, rice and sugar, as well as capital goods and intermediary goods, whereas the exports growth was driven mainly by high traditional exports, being on coffee, minerals, and increased non-traditional exports, the latter reflecting domestic industry strength. As a result of these developments, the trade deficit recorded a modest increase of 2.5% in 2025, and these positive developments in the external sector explain why our currency has stabilized. Foreign exchange pressures are easing. The Rwandan franc's depreciation against the US dollars moderated to 4.4% in 2025, compared to a depreciation of 9.4% in the same period in 2024. And one may recall the sharp depreciations that we had in 2023 and 2024, as you can see in the chart, where the Rwandan franc had depreciated by 18% in 2023 and then 9% in 2024. And the stabilization that we are now observing is supported by three things. One, there's a stronger current account driven by tourism receipts and remittances inflows. The domestic foreign exchange market reforms that were introduced last year, as well as the weakening of the US dollar on global foreign exchange markets. The following section focuses on Rwanda's economic growth. Rwanda's economy maintains strong momentum with real GDP growth reaching 9.4% in 2025, and this is a very strong performance, surpassing the NST2 annual GDP growth target of 9.3%. The high GDP growth was broad-based across all major sectors, starting with the industry that grew by 11%, services sector expanding by 8.5%, and then agriculture by 7.4%. The services sector remained strong, supported mainly by trade and transport, ICT, financial services, as well as scientific and technical services. The industry sector growth was led by strong performance in the mining, manufacturing, and construction, and mining expanding on the back of higher export volumes and favorable global commodity prices. Construction growth was sustained through continued public and private investment in infrastructure projects, which in turn supported manufacturing activity, especially in construction materials. Furthermore, we observed that the food processing subsector recorded solid gains, contributing to the overall strength of our industrial sector. Lastly, the agriculture sector recorded solid growth in 2025, driven primarily by strong performance in export crops, especially coffee, while food crop production delivered moderate gains during agricultural seasons A and B. We now turn on the developments of the interbank, deposit, and credit markets. In 2025, the central bank rate increased slightly to 6.75% from 6.5% in 2024. And you may recall the Monetary Policy Committee decision in August 2025, which had increased the central bank rate by 25 basis points as inflation was picking up. On average, we see money market rates declining in 2025. The interbank rate, which is a 7-day rate, declined to 6.45% on average in 2025 from an interbank rate of 7.6% a year prior, while deposit rates also continued to decline at 9.2%, from the 10.3% we had in 2024, while lending rates also reduced to 15.8% from lending rates of 16.1% in 2024, and this improved access to credit by households and corporates, as we will see in the performance of the financial sector presentation. Last month, the Monetary Policy Committee decided to increase the central bank rate to 7.25%, a 50 basis points hike, and this decision was driven by an upward revision of our inflation forecasts. Indeed, when we look at inflation developments in the last 3 years, our inflation reached record levels in 2022. We may recall that at the time, inflation had reached 21% in the fourth quarter of 2022, but started easing towards our target band of 2 to 8% from the first quarter of 2024, thanks to tighter monetary policy and additional government measures to curb inflation. In 2025, headline inflation averaged 7% compared to 4.8% that we had in 2024. When we look at the third and fourth quarter of 2025, inflation had increased to 7.2% and then 7.4%, which compares to lower inflation rates in the first half of 2025 at 6.7%, as we see in the charts for Q1 2025, and then another 7.2% that we had in Q2. This increase observed in the second half of 2025 was primarily driven by higher prices in core food, prices in hotels and restaurants, but also higher health services tariffs. Fresh food inflation eased, mainly reflecting lower prices for fresh vegetables and fruits, supported by improved agricultural harvests and base effects from the previous year during the same period. However, where we see concern is on energy inflation, which increased because of higher prices for liquid fuels, solid fuels, and electricity, following adjustment in pump fuel prices, as well as higher charcoal prices and the upward revision of electricity tariffs in October last year. In last month, February 2026, headline inflation was above our higher target bound of 8%, standing at 9.2%. And looking ahead, our outlook is that headline inflation is expected to remain elevated in the near term, slightly above 8%, before gradually returning to the target band of 2 to 8% by the end of 2026. But risks to this outlook are linked to, one, global geopolitical tensions, particularly the conflict in the Middle East, but also climate-related risks that may impact agricultural production. Given the elevated uncertainties, but also volatile global markets, the central bank will continue to monitor inflation developments closely. We stand ready through the Monetary Policy Committee to take appropriate measures to safeguard price stability while we continue to engage government stakeholders for policy measures aimed at bringing back inflation within our medium-term target of 5%. We are now moving to the financial sector's performance. First, we observe that Rwanda's financial sector continues to grow steadily, alongside solid economic performance, as we've just seen, supporting increased credit to households and businesses. In 2025, total financial sector assets increased by close to 24%, reaching 15.9 trillion Rwandan francs in December 2025. This steady growth was on the back of deposit growth, higher pension contributions, and improved investment income across all subsectors. Asset growth was recorded across the banking sector, increasing by 22.7%. Insurance sector assets grew by 14.3%, while assets of the pension funds grew by 35.3%. Non-deposit financial institutions decreased by 10%, mainly due to the integration of the Business Development Fund, BDF, into BRD, the Development Bank of Rwanda, and that created a base effect in the reporting period. For Forex Bureau assets, they grew by 8.3%, and driven by an increase in share capital for some Forex bureaus and a significant rise in retained earnings. When we look at financial sector assets as a share of GDP, the assets have now reached a level of 68% of GDP compared to a share of 64.7% of GDP in 2024, and this reflects really continuous financial deepening. In terms of our financial sector landscape, we have seen developments as our financial institutions become more efficient and resilient. The central bank currently regulates 484 financial institutions, down from 696 institutions we had in 2024. And the decline in the number of regulated institutions was mainly due to the consolidation in microfinance sector through the transformation of 416 Umurenge SACCOs into 30 district SACCOs. The restructuring aligns SACCO operations with Rwanda's 30 districts, and it enables district SACCOs to operate with stronger financial capacity, improved governance, and greater operational scale thanks to the SACCO's automation. The consolidation also enhances supervisory efficiency and strengthens institutional resilience. And the development that we are seeing in Rwanda's financial sector align with global trends, but also support greater access to finance, improve transaction efficiency, financial inclusion, and innovation in the sector. We have also seen an increase in payment service providers, reflecting the rapid expansion of digital financial services and the growing use of digital financial services and instant payment platforms. This is driving the demand for payment services, supports financial inclusion, again, innovation in the financial sector. Although the number of non-banking institutions continues to grow, the banking sector, as we can see on the right-hand side of the slide, remains the largest subsector in terms of share of assets, accounting for 67% of total assets. Looking at credit market developments, lending continued to grow to meet private sector needs as well as household financing needs. Outstanding loans grew by 25%, reaching 6.3 trillion Rwandan francs, and this reflects the increase in lending appetite. Banks account for the majority of outstanding loans, 87% of all loans are by banks, followed by microfinance institutions, 11.8% of all loans, while non-deposit taking financial institutions contribute a smaller share of 1%. When we look at credit allocations, the top finance sectors are trade, construction, personal loans, and manufacturing, which together account for about 70% of total lending. While these sectors are central to economic activity, this concentration underscores the importance of continued diversification. On sectors where financing significantly varies, manufacturing remains relatively underfinanced by microfinance institutions, largely because large projects require longer-term financing, large-scale financing that present higher capital and risk considerations. We have also observed that the credit to agricultural sector has gradually improved in the recent quarters, although not yet sufficient, with both banks and microfinance institutions increasing their lendings. Nevertheless, bank financing to agriculture remains limited. In contrast, microfinance institutions continue to increase the share of agriculture in their loan portfolio from 12% in 2024 to 15.5% in 2025. And especially, we recognize that SACCO networks, through the SACCO networks, microfinance institutions continue to support a large number of smallholder farmers. Despite the improvement we are seeing on agricultural financing, a deep assessment of agricultural lending is ongoing to understand the constraints which will inform policy actions to boost financing in this sector. Looking at asset quality, we observe that it continues to improve across the financial sector. Non-performing loans have declined steadily from 2021, so the last 5 years, where we had a non-performing ratio at 4.8%, both in MFIs and banks, and now it has reduced to 2.5%. And this reflects strengthened risk management practices by credit institutions, including better credit assessment, monitoring, and recovery processes. Looking at the non-performing rate ratio in the top finance sectors, they're also below the 5% maximum threshold. Looking at manufacturing, the non-performing loan ratio is at 4.6%, while for trade and construction, the NPL ratio is below 2%, as well as for the real estate sector. There's some pressure on the personal loans, where the non-performing loans are at 4.8%, but overall, across all top finance sectors, the NPL remains below the 5% ratio by the central bank. Turning to stability indicators, financial institutions remain well capitalized. Capital adequacy in the banking sector at 21.9%. In the microfinance sector, the capital adequacy ratio was at 33.8%. And in the insurance sector, the solvency ratio was at 306.5%. So across all subsectors, adequate capital buffers will allow institutions to absorb any potential shocks, and they're way above the regulatory requirements. On the liquidity side, the financial sector, or all financial institutions, continue to maintain sufficient liquidity buffers to fulfill their short-term obligations and clients' needs. Liquidity ratios remained well above the minimum requirements, be it for banks, microfinance institutions, but also insurance. The banking sector liquidity coverage ratio was at 358%. For microfinance institutions was at 67%, well above the 30% required liquidity ratio for microfinance, and insurance liquidity also improved with a ratio of 124%, which is way above the 100% minimum requirement. Our financial sector continues to sustain profitability, recording positive earnings. For credit institutions, profits were steady even as lending rates were continuing to ease. Looking at banks, the return on equity stood at 19%, and the slight decline we see was due to the moderation of growth in profits that was driven by a lower growth of interest income and an increase in overhead costs. For the microfinance sector, return on equity declined following a larger capital base, but still was in double digits at 13.2%, while the return on equity for the insurers is at 21%, increasing due to an increase in profits and higher investment income. Building on this, the central bank also monitors financial inclusion indicators beyond account ownership. Financial inclusion continued to expand, supporting broader economic resilience of households and micro and small and medium enterprises. Access to savings and deposit accounts has increased significantly, with now 2.5 million customers having access to savings accounts and 4.4 million clients having deposit accounts. And this reflects growing participation, particularly among women and youth. Where we see gaps are on the access to credit and access to insurance products, which are still relatively low and skewed towards certain segment of the population and businesses. And this highlights the need that we have for targeted interventions to deepen the use of financial services, particularly for women, youth, but also micro and small enterprises, to ensure a more balanced access to financial tools. And in that regard, the strategies and roadmap that were launched this month, being the National Insurance Strategy, as well as the National Financial Inclusion Roadmap for 2026-2030, are here to address those gaps that we are seeing in the usage of financial services in our country. The next session highlights the performance of the pension sector, where pension funds continued to expand, supported by recent reforms that strengthened contribution inflows, also supported by investment income in the public pension scheme. The public pension fund contributions grew by 122%, reaching 218 billion at the end of December 2025, compared to contribution of 98 billion a year prior. For private pensions, the contribution also increased by 19.3%, driven by the increase in the number of contributors, while for Ejoheza, the long-term savings schemes, growth was at 19% due to intensified mobilization efforts, supporting higher participation from the informal sector, which remains the largest source of membership and contributions, and match really the desire of government in putting in place Ejoheza. The recent reforms approved by Cabinet are expected to further support the growth of Ejoheza and enhance contributors' social well-being. The next section looks at payment systems, which the central bank also regulates. We observed that in 2025, digital financial services continue to play a critical role in improving efficiency and inclusion. The value of electronic payments to GDP rose to 332%, up from 302% that we had from January to December 2024. And this reflects stronger adoption of digital channels and continued progress on the cashless agenda. Retail payments also expanded to 77 trillion Rwandan francs in 2025, reflecting stable and reliable payment systems that have enhanced efficiency, trust, and innovation in service delivery. As central bank and regulator of payment system providers, we started monitoring the stability of all payment systems. For instance, availability of system for electronic money issuers was averaging 99.6% from January to December 2025, and for this year, In addition to electronic money issuers, we closely monitor availability of the Rwanda National Digital Payment System, as well as the Rwanda Integrated Payment and Processing System availability, and we'll be able to showcase the stability indicators as we go forward. Looking at interoperable retail payments, they have seen remarkable growth. The Retail Instant Payment System of Rwanda, eCash, grew significantly in 2025, doubling its volume of transactions from 12 million transactions in 2024 to 28 million transactions last year, while the value of transaction processed through eCash nearly tripled, reaching 136 billion in 2025 compared to 50.9 billion the previous year. This strong growth highlights deeper financial inclusion, greater economic activity through digital channels, as well as continued progress toward a more efficient and integrated payment ecosystem. Furthermore, the continued onboarding of payment service providers strengthens the interoperability framework. At end December 2025, 20 payment service providers had been onboarded on eCash. That is 9 banks, 5 microfinance institutions, 1 SACCO, which is Umwarimu SACCO, and 5 electronic money issuers. Looking ahead, as central bank, we expect the financial sector to remain resilient and well-positioned to support economic growth while weathering any potential shocks. With this outlook, the National Bank of Rwanda continues to monitor the following vulnerabilities. First, heightened global geopolitical tensions. Second, the virtual assets developments and adoption. Third, operational and cyber risks. And fourth, limited financing to strategic sectors. The central bank, as financial regulator, we also continue to strengthen resilience across financial institutions while supporting the efficient delivery of financial services. As a recap of the key financial sector developments in 2025, we observed that Rwanda's financial sector continues to grow with adequate capital and liquidity buffers. Innovation is expanding alongside the digitization of financial services with continued monitoring of virtual assets developments. In addition to the impact of geopolitical tensions on financial stability, cyber and operational risks are closely monitored. So in conclusion, in spite of global headwinds, the central bank remains confident about Rwanda's macroeconomic stability, about Rwanda's sustained growth, and the soundness of the financial system to support financial resilience of households and businesses. This marks the end of our March Monetary Policy and Financial Stability Statement. We look forward to your questions and to engaging in meaningful discussions. I thank you all for your kind attention.
Another round of applause for the governor. Her presentation was really clear and insightful. I saw a number of us taking notes and engaging with the presentation, and allow me to present to you a few key takeaways from Governor's presentation. First, despite a difficult global environment, Rwanda's economy has remained strong and continues to grow. Second, while inflation is still elevated for now, there is a clear path forward, toward bringing it down, and the central bank stands ready to act where needed. The third one, the global environment remains uncertain, specifically with the ongoing geopolitical tensions and this calls for continued vigilance. And finally, our financial sector remains stable, well capitalized and resilient, well positioned to support the economy even in challenging times. Before we move to the next session, I know we've been seated for long. Allow me to request you humbly to stand up. And I request you to stretch a bit. And as you're stretching, please say hi to the person seated next to you. You can move across and engage with the different people. We can continue stretching. Thank you very much. You may now take your seats as we move into the Q&A session. And for this segment, I will invite the Honorable Governor to take her seat on the stage. Governor, you're welcome. I will also invite the Deputy Governor, Mr. Nick Barije, to join the Governor on the stage. Followed by the Chief Economist, Dr. Thierry Kalisa, and the Acting Executive Director for Financial Stability, Mr. Bernard Nsenjumva. As our panelists take their seats, let me briefly add this. In times like these, clarity matters, but so does engagement. This session we are getting into is an opportunity to deepen our understanding, seek clarification, and engage directly on the issues that matter most to our economy. Distinguished guests, we will now take your questions and comments, and this will be done in two ways. You may raise your hand. Our team will bring a microphone to you. We request you to please state your name, your institution, and who you're directing your question to. Alternatively, you may submit your question through the QR code, and that is Slido. Muri uyu mwanya turakira ibibazo no mu Kinyarwanda. Ufite ikibazo cyangwa igitekerezo yazamura ukuboko, kandi murasabwa kwivuga, muvuge n'urwego muhagarariye ndetse mugaragaze n'uwo mubaza ikibazo. And to the media in the house, we'll have a press conference shortly after the session. You'll be requested to remain behind, so keep your questions for the press conference. So the floor is now open for comments, questions, and any clarification. Waba afite ikibazo yakibaza no mu Kinyarwanda. Governor, with your permission, there is a question here.
Thank you, Honorable Governor. My name is Nirere Madeleine. I'm a Chief Ombudsman. I have 2 questions. But first of all, I'd like to congratulate the Governor for a brilliant presentation. Also to state how much we are very grateful for being invited here. And also to hear that our financial stability, we have financial stability. Also, the inflation is decreasing. But what I wish to know is how to, for general public, how to explain the decline of inflation, why we see the rise of price on the market. How to explain in simple ways to citizens, to general public who see the rise of price, but here we will see that there is decline of inflation. Also, I'd like to know what the expectations when we to mix BRD and BDF, what the benefit today we can see from there. Also, regarding the youth, you can see there is a long way to go with loans, with what the strategies are in place to encourage women and youth in that area. Thank you.
There's a hand there. Thank you. Please help them with the microphone.
Thank you, Honorable Governor, for your clear presentation. My name is Dr. Leticia Nyinawamwiza. I'm Deputy Chair of Economic and Finance Committee in the Senate. Allow me to ask my question in Kinyarwanda. Kubera ko duhagarariye abaturage nabo bagomba kumenya ko beneri hari kandi ibatekereza. Nyakubahwa Governor, ibyo mwatweretse ndetse mwanatumaze impungenge mutubwira ko n'abanyarwanda bagomba gutekana nubwo ubukungu cyangwa ibibazo mu isi bishobora kuba byifashe nabi, kandi turabishimira kuko no guhumuriza buri munyarwanda. Nyakubahwa Governor, kuri slide yanyu ya 12 aho mwavugaga kuri credit market development mugaragaza financial sectors ko zifashe, ubuhinzi mu kwaka inguzanyo buri inyuma, kandi turabizi ko abanyarwanda benshi, abaturage bacu benshi bari mu buhinzi. Ese ko mbona ari ikibazo niba ahari benshi batabasha no kwaka inguzanyo, ese ubwo bafite ubushobozi? Kandi turebye uko ubukungu buhagaze na sectors zi contributinga, ubuhinzi tubushyiramo kandi tukabuha umwanya munini. Ndabizi ntabwo muri Ministry w'ubuhinzi, nta nubwo mushinzwe ubuhinzi gusa, ariko muri abajyanama ba guverinoma. Ese ubu buhinzi kugira ngo tubuzamure contributing bifatika kuri economy y'igihugu tubigenze dute? Mu nama mwagira abahinzi ndetse n'ababashinzwe. Murakoze.
We'll take one more question and then hand over to you, Governor. If we have a question on Slido, we can have that projected. So there is this question that says, with the increase of the CBR, how is the National Bank of Rwanda balancing the need to control inflation driven by global shocks with the need to sustain financing of the economy? I'll hand over back to you, Governor. Thank you.
Thank you, Doreen, and thank you for the questions. I will start with the questions by Honorable Chief Ombudsman. One, in explaining why we see projected global inflation declining, but in Rwanda, we've seen actually since the second half of 2025, a pickup in inflation up to 9.2% in February. The main reasons for Rwanda's inflation numbers is one, that we've seen higher energy inflation, meaning the increase of prices of energy products, being fuel prices that were revised in the second half of 2025, but also charcoal prices because of supply, limited supply or lower supply, especially in December and January. We've also seen an increase in prices up to 13,000 per bag of charcoal. And third reason has been also electricity tariffs revision. So if we compare the second half of 2025 to the second half of 2024, then core energy inflation increased. There was also an increase in prices, especially in hotels and restaurants, as I mentioned, as I would say indirect impact of previous inflation in 2023 and 2024, especially on food products. There has been a moderate production in season A of agriculture because of rain patterns. So those three factors combined make Rwanda's inflation higher, on a higher path. However, our projections still indicate that for the first half of the year, we'll see inflation, meaning a lower increase in prices. But what we want to always clarify is to say, when we say there's low inflation, it doesn't mean that prices have gone down. It's the increase of prices that is now stabilizing. There are risks that we have shown on these projections. One of the major concerns we're seeing because of the Middle East conflict is the high prices of oil, which might have an impact on fuel pump prices in the coming months, as well as the prices of gas. And so with the new developments, we will make new projections. There are global projections that are expected to be released next month by the IMF on the World Economic Outlook, but also right before our Monetary Policy Committee meetings in May, we will have revised our forecast and then have a better indication of where inflation is going. And so the key message here is to say there are still pressures on inflation, especially domestic inflation for the first half of 2026. We were seeing an easing of the inflation path for the second half of 2026. However, with the uncertainties on global commodity markets, supply chain disruptions because of the suspension of flows on the Strait of Hormuz, for instance, and the conflict in the Middle East, there are still uncertainties of how commodity prices will evolve in the next half of 2026. But again, the central bank will ensure that we take the necessary policies to bring back inflation between our target band of 2 to 8% by the end of 2026. The second question was on benefits that as financial regulator we see in the merger between BRD and BDF, or I would say BDF being merged into the development of Bank of Rwanda. The first one is streamlining processes, and I would say the guarantees, especially guarantee products that were being offered by BDF, being incorporated in the pool of products that BRD has. That's one. Second, more financial muscle now given to the BDF part of the business from the capital base that BRD has. Second, from a government's perspective, making sure that development aspect of BRD is complemented by what BDF was doing in terms of supporting underserved segments of the population, being the youth, being the micro and small businesses and also women, and integrate that into the development aspect of the financing that BRD provides. In terms of prudential requirements, we have no concerns at all from BRD by absorbing BDF into the bank. On the women and youth, how do we increase their access to finance? It is true that what we've seen overall in the last almost 17 years is that financial inclusion overall, in terms of people who have access to bank accounts or mobile money wallets, it has increased significantly from 21% of adult Rwandans in 2008 up to 92% that we had in the last FinScope survey in 2024. But access to credit overall is still a challenge, with only less than 20% of Rwandans accessing credit. And among them, the women and youth have there's even a larger gap between men and women accessing credit, or youth accessing credit, or saving products or insurance products. And so that's the reason why we have worked on a financial inclusion roadmap for the next 4 years to really work on the usage of financial services, tracking not only people who have bank accounts or mobile money wallets, but how are they using those accounts? Are they accessing credit? And what are the impediments to that? There are a lot of interventions that are planned. One, financial literacy is extremely important for women and youth. And we at the Central Bank have been conducting with the support of local government, and I see the 4 governors here, conducting a campaign in rural districts to train women on the use of digital financial services, starting with mobile money services. And we have now reached close to 150,000 women in all districts in Rwanda. But we were also working closely with the National Women Council, with digital ambassadors, as well as the different districts that we operate in. And what we have realized is that when you don't go on the ground to really make sure that all segments of our population have access to those services, but also understand the benefits of them, then we won't see really, we won't be able to move the needle. So we intend to do the same approach for youth, as well as different programs targeting micro and small enterprises, especially on using alternative credit data, so that when someone asks for a credit, you don't always ask them for collateral, which youth generally do not have, but use data that you have on their mobile money transactions, but also using these guarantee schemes to start seeing an improvement or an increase in access to credit. So there are different indicators we will track in the next 4 years, and we are confident that we will see an increase in uptake of credit, saving products, but also on the insurance side with the new 10-year national insurance strategy, which is also focusing on digitization, on awareness campaign on insurance, on development of new products, to also see the uptake of insurance products by more than and get above the less than 2% penetration rate we have in insurance, up to 7.5%. That is our target in 10 years. So I hope that I've responded to all your questions, Honorable Chief Ombudsman. Ku bibazo, ikibazo cyabajijwe na Honorable Senator Letitia, icya mbere ni ukwibaza impamvu dukomeje kubona ko inguzanyo zijya mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi zikiri hasi. Nibyo koko mu mibare twerekanye twabonye ko inzego z'ubukungu zibona inguzanyo, iya mbere n'urwego rw'ubucuruzi, hakajyaho urwego rw'ubwubatsi, urwego rw'inganda, wagera ku rwego rw'ubuhinzi haracyarimo imbogamizi kuko inguzanyo zijya mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi ziracyari kuri 3%. N'ubwo byazamutseho gato, imyaka ishize hari igihe twabaga turi hasi ya 2%. Imbogamizi zikirimo ni nuko hari imishinga y'ubuhinzi yagiye ihabwa inguzanyo, ariko izo nguzanyo ntizishyurwe neza. Ibyo rero bigatuma ibigo by'imari bitinya kongera gutanga inguzanyo muri urwo rwego. Ariko hari gahunda nk'iya SIDAT ishamikiye ku kugeza inguzanyo nyinshi ku rwego rw'ubuhinzi, ariko harimo no gukoresha cyane cyane ubwishingizi kugira ngo inguzanyo niyo hagira ikibazo mu rwego rw'umusaruro hatagira ibihombo kuri izo nguzanyo ziba zatanzwe. Ikindi twavuga kigeze ku rugero rushimishije ni ibigo by'imari biciriritse uko bikomeje guha inguzanyo urwego rw'ubuhinzi. Mu mibare dufite nuko ubu 15% by'inguzanyo by'ibigo bya microfinance izijya mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi, kandi byiyongereyeho 3% kuko umwaka wabanjije wa 2024 izo nguzanyo zari kuri 12%. Cyane cyane iyo turebye sako zikomeje guha inguzanyo urwego rw'ubuhinzi n'abahinzi muri rusange, ariko ibyo bigo by'imari biciriritse bifite limit kuko bitaba bifite navuga umutungo munini ku buryo kibona ko mu mibare urwego rw'ubuhinzi rutaragera ku kigero twifuza. Ariko nka banki nkuru y'u Rwanda ntabwo turebera gusa iyo mibare. Ubu hari ubusesenguzi turimo gukora kugira ngo turebe imbogamizi zose zikiri mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi butuma hataba inguzanyo nyinshi, dufatanyije na Minisiteri y'Ubuhinzi n'Ubworozi, dufatanyije na Access to Finance Rwanda. Hari umushinga twatangiye wo kureba ukuntu twagabanya ikiguzi ariko n'umwanya bifata kugira ngo abahinzi bagere ku nguzanyo. Hari igerageza turimo dukoresheje ikoranabuhanga cyo twise Agricultural Lending Platform, yafasha gukusanya amakuru ku bahinzi mu buryo bwihuse, ndetse n'inguzanyo zabo tubona ko ku mpuzandengo bitwara kugira ngo bagere ku nguzanyo kuva igihe yayisabiye kugeza igihe yasesenguwe n'igihe aboneye amafaranga, hari igihe bitwara ibyumweru hagati ya 6 na 7, aho ugasanga hari igihe n'igihe cyo gutangira ihinga kiba cyarenze. Ariko twizeye ko uwo mushinga twatangiye gushyiraho iryo kusanya cyangwa se urubuga rukusanya amakuru ku muhinzi ku buryo ibigo by'imari byayakoresha bigatanga inguzanyo ku buryo bwihuse. Tubona ko bishobotse izo nguzanyo hakoreshejwe ikoranabuhanga zashobora kujya zitangwa mu gihe kitarenze iminsi 2. Nigerageza zizarangira mu kwezi kwa 9, kandi dufatanyije n'ibigo bitandukanye harimo banki ya BK, harimo BRD, ndetse n'ibigo by'imari iciriritse microfinance twahereye ku Mutanguha ndetse na Copedu. Ubwo mu kwezi kwa 9 tuzabatangariza ibyaba byavuye muri uwo mushinga. Ikindi kibazo cyabajijwe ku rubuga kuri central bank rate, how the central bank balances with the increase of central bank rate to curb inflation, but also the need to continue financing our economy. On this, I will ask our chief economist to give more clarity. Thank you. Thierry, you may go.
Yes, thank you, Governor. On this question, I would say that the central bank rate, when the central banks decide to increase their rate or tighten monetary policy, it's true that in the short term, there's a trade-off between economic growth and inflation. But if you look at it from a medium to long-term perspective, the trade-off is not there, I would say, because when we have price stability is one of the most important conditions for macroeconomic stability, and you cannot have long-term growth and sustain long-term growth without macroeconomic stability. So in our case, in Rwanda, in February, the Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee decided to increase the rate to 7.25% because of revised inflation projections that were showing that inflation was going to go and stay above the band in the first half of the year before starting to come down. We do not think that there will be an impact on growth. As you saw in the numbers that were just presented, economic growth for 2025 was at 9.4%, surpassing the projections that we had of 7% and much higher than the growth of the previous year of 7.2%. Then the numbers related to access to financing the economy, when you look at new authorized loans in 2025, it was 25% growth. The outstanding credit to the private sector increased at 22%. So there is no risks that we see towards reducing growth or access to finance. Thank you.
I can see a number of questions on Slido online. We'll take through from Slido, then come back to the room. The first one is for the Deputy Governor, and it says we see growth in financial sector assets supported by robust credit expansion and financial inclusion. Is this rapid growth a concern to financial stability? And then the second says, what are the measures in place expected to address the rising prices, mainly for gas and oil? And also the third one is update us on the progress to adopt the digital currency. Governor, I think we can take those and then come back to the room. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now delegate to Honorable Deputy Governor for the first question on growth in financial sector assets, and he can also respond on the progress of the to adopt digital currency, CBDC, but also virtual assets. Please, Deputy Governor Nick.
Thank you, Governor. I think as the Governor's statement showed, we continue to see true growth in financial sector assets. In the numbers, we are showing us a growth of close to 16 trillion. We see lending increasing to 6.3 trillion. Now, to ask the question, is there concern? I would say at the moment, no, for a couple of reasons. As the Governor's statement showed, GDP growth last year was at 9.4%. And as she mentioned as well, NST2 calls for GDP growth per year of close to 9.3. Now, lending increases because there is demand, because there is growth. The concern would be if we see an increase in non-performing loans, which we do not see. Again, in the Governor's statement, non-performing loans on average around 2.5%. So we want to see more intermediation, and as the Honorable Senator was asking, there are more sectors of the economy that require more funding, and the question here is not only debt funding, we also need to be exploring other means of funding because we want to see more growth within the economy for us to reach NST2 targets. So specifically to answer the question, are there concerns around financial stability? No. Current performance is good. Financial sector is well capitalized. It has strong liquidity buffers, and the economy continues to grow, thus demanding for more funding. Now, Governor, to the other question regarding the central bank digital currency, as had been communicated, and maybe to give some more context, between 2022 and 2024, the central bank first carried out a feasibility study to inform on the central bank digital currency. And this feasibility study identified 4 strategic priorities. 1, enhancing resilience. Would the central bank digital currency enable us as a country be able to be resilient? 2, are there opportunities of fostering innovation and competition? 3, would the central bank digital currency support the cashless economy? And lastly, would it contributing to making cross-border remittances better? That's what the feasibility study identified as opportunities of a central bank digital currency. Having completed the feasibility study, we now moved on to the next step, which was the proof of concept. And this proof of concept that was carried out has demonstrated that those opportunities indeed are there. It demonstrated that there is enhanced resiliency. It demonstrated that there are opportunities of fostering innovation and competition. It demonstrated that a CBD truly would support the cashless economy. However, during the proof of concept, there were limitations on the cross-border payments. Now, with the proof of concept finalized, we are now going to a pilot phase. And the pilot phase is to increase the scope in implementing this central bank digital currency. So that's where we currently are. And Governor, the other thing that we can inform the audience is that with Cabinet having approved the virtual assets law, it's all complementary to this. So the central bank digital currency is now moving on to a pilot phase, and we will continue to engage with the public on which steps we are taking. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Governor. We now come back to the room.
Doreen, there was a question on oil and gas price rising and which measures are in place or expected to be in place to address the rising prices. First, we wanted to clarify that we haven't seen pump fuel prices review as a result of the ongoing conflict. The last review was only on diesel prices, but then it looks at the prices of the previous 2 months. And we expect that RURA revise again pump prices as they usually do in 2 months, meaning in May. That's where we might see the impact of the current, we would say, price shock on gas and oil. But this is not the first time that as a country we've seen sudden rise in oil prices. We may remember that in 2022, with the Ukraine war, when the Ukraine war started, also oil prices started increasing, going above $100 per barrel. At that time, what measures were put in place? One, it was to make sure that we mitigate the impact on pump fuel prices where government had decided to take part of the cost and then not have increased pump prices that would be too high for the population and businesses. But most importantly is the government's efforts to always have enough supply of petroleum products in the country, and the fact that we have strategic fuel reserves that can be used in cases of prolonged crisis to also tame the price pressures on gas and oil. So we expect that similar measures, if necessary, would be taken, and that's also the advice we continue to give to government stakeholders to make sure that there's limited impact, especially for vulnerable households, whenever we see increased food inflation or energy inflation.
Thank you, Governor. We had a question, we had a hand in front, actually too.
Thank you, Governor, for this brilliant presentation and the great achievements of the financial sector. Mine is not a question, this is a contribution to the answers to the question raised by Honorable Senator Dr. Letitia. Yabaje mu Kinyarwanda intumwa ya Rwanda. Ubwo nanjye ndeka munsubize mu Kinyarwanda. So gusubiza ni ukunganira ku bisobanuro byatanzwe ku kibazo gihoraho kigaruka kenshi kandi gifite ishingiro cy'ishoramari rike rya mu buhinzi riva mu bikorera, ariko nanone bigaturuka ko inguzanyo z'ibigo by'imari zijya mu buhinzi zikiri hasi. Icyo nshaka kugaragaza hano cyangwa no kwibutsa ko kiranazwi nuko urwego rw'ubuhinzi hari amahirwe, ntabwo tuwe kubona muri risk gusa, ariko harimo n'amahirwe afatika. Ingero ebyiri, leta yashyizeho uburyo bw'ubwishingizi bw'ubuhinzi, kandi harimo na nkunganire ifasha abaturage n'abari mu bikorwa by'ubuhinzi n'ubworozi. Iro ni ingamba zifatika zigabanya za risk ibigo by'imari bikunze gutinya. Icya kabiri, uko imyaka ishira turabona abashoramari bigenda binjira mu bikorwa by'ubuhinzi n'ubworozi mu buryo bwa kijyambere, mu buryo bwunguka. Hari ibikorwa bifatika mu gutunganya umusaruro w'ubuhinzi n'ubworozi. Hari ibikorwa byinshi byohereza umusaruro mu mahanga. Biraga ku isoko rw'ubuhinzi na agribusiness ririmo riraguka. Ari ni amahirwe rero ku bigo by'imari, byaba amabanki, yaba ibigo bya microfinance, ku buryo dukwiye guhindura na perception n'imyumvire y'uru rwego. Icya kabiri, leta yashyizeho n'umushinga mugari, ngira ngo gavana yawugarutseho, uriya World Bank SIDAT nayo ifite igice kinini cyane cyo kugabanya risk mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi n'ibishamikiyeho agribusiness yose, ku buryo amahirwe ahubwo dukwiye nk'ibigo by'imari dukwiye kuyakoresha. Ahubwo haracyari ikindi kibazo, ibigo by'imari ntabwo nabyo birashyiraho uburyo bwo kubaka ubushobozi imbere bwo kumva neza iyi sector, ku buryo bajyamo bumva neza n'izo risike zikaba zizapimwa uko zumvikana n'ingamba zo za mitigation zikaba zafatwa. So urugero ruto, banki ya Kigali hari ibyo tumaze kugeraho nubwo tutarajya aho twifuza. Twashyizeho urwego, ishami ryihariye rishinzwe ubuhinzi muri banki, ririmo impuguke zitandukanye mu by'ubuhinzi na agribusiness, ku buryo bidufasha neza kumva imiterere na opportunities ziri mu buhinzi. Kandi turabona nubwo tutaragera aho twifuza, turifuza gutanga inguzanyo nyinshi zirenze dufite uyu munsi. Ariko mu myaka 3 ishize, inguzanyo za banki za banki ya Kigali zijya mu buhinzi zikubye inshuro 3, kuva kuri miliyari 29 2023, uyu mwaka tumaze kurenza miliyari 90. Kandi gahunda y'imyaka 3 iri imbere ni uko zikomeza kuzamuka ku muvuduko wihuse kurushaho. Ndabona rero nubwo tukiri inyuma as a sector, amahirwe ari mu gushyirwaho n'ubufatanye bw'inzego, dushobora kugira impinduka tugira mu kongera inguzanyo zijya mu buhinzi. Kandi si ugufasha ubuhinzi, ni ukwifasha ko turi muri business tukajyamo, ariko tununguka kandi tunafasha no gutereza imbere uru rwego. Ndabona amahirwe arahari rero, hakwiye gushaka uburyo tufatanya kugira ngo mu myaka 2, 3 iri imbere uru rwego rwazamuye rwose mu nzego zifatika z'ubukungu bwacu. Murakoze.
Thank you.
Good morning to everybody. I'm Professor Tombola Gustave from the Board of Prime Insurance. Thank you, Honorable Governor, for the good presentation of the monetary policy and the financial stability statement, which to me comforts us as it shows the growth as well as containing most of the challenges with to our economy and our financial sector. I've seen the focus in the Middle East conflict and the Strait of Hormuz. My question is, I did not see, maybe it's within the global uncertainty, the region uncertainty, because we are also undergoing the conflict within the region, which has been there. What was the impact on our financial stability as well as the monetary policy? Or how does the central bank consider this conflict in the region instead of going very far in the Middle East, while Africa also is caught into this kind of conflict? Thank you, Governor.
I don't see any other hand. One more hand. Okay, one more question and we hand over to Governor. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Sinatu Jeremy from Kigali Independent University in the Department of Economics. The first, I appreciate this time to invite us to come to join this presentation of monetary policy and financial statement stability. My question, it is one question and concern. My question is goes to the governor of central bank. I am asking, the increase in central bank interest rate, is it going to solving this problem of inflation when we are still facing this high gap of importation and the export? I mean, our exportation, it is still high compared to our importation is still high compared to our export. And I don't really know, sure, if even if it is like more money is in circulation, I don't sure if there is every Rwandan, is it easy to access the money as it is, I don't know. My concern is we need to put more effort in the agriculture sector, means to have more productivity, to increase what we export in the side of agribusiness, means to add the value to our agriculture, that will contribute to our exportation and increase the currency from outside that we get in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll hand over to you, Governor.
Thank you for the questions again. Nabanza no gushimira Group CEO wa BK ku nyunganizi yatanze mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi, tuzi ko the Bank of Kigali nayo iri muri bank ziri muri wa mushinga w'igerageza navuze yo kugira ngo tworohereze inguzanyo, ukugeza ku inguzanyo ku bahinzi, ariko no kuba yarashyizeho iyi desk ya agricultural desk nabyo byafashije nk'imibare yagarutseho, ndetse na BRD nayo muri uyu mushinga wa SIDAT igenda inatanga amafaranga ku bindi bigo by'imari kugira ngo abantu benshi abahinzi benshi bashobore kugeraho n'inguzanyo. On the question asked by Prime Insurance Board member Professor Tombola on the regional uncertainties, I believe this was the case mostly last year, the first quarter of last year, where there were heightened, I would say, tensions and conflicts in Eastern DRC, but that shock has been already absorbed. You've seen that on economic growth, there hasn't been any impact. If anything, our economy has grown above what was forecasted, 9.4%, compared to the 7.2% that had been forecasted for 2025. In terms of financial stability, we haven't seen any impact, and we don't expect it to any impact, as you've seen, be it on the liquidity buffers, capital, but also profitability of our financial institutions. There hasn't been any impact. And our outlook, the reason why we concentrate on the Middle East conflict is because we know if there's an energy shock, meaning on the supply, but also the prices which go together, then that hurts our economy because of all our petroleum products are imported, and 57% of our imports comes from the Middle East. So that's the reason why we concentrate on that. Secondly is also supply chain disruption, which might have an impact on the supplies of goods that we import for the country, which, if it's capital goods, for instance, they would have an impact on our industrialization. But we have to remember as well that the Middle East is one of our major trading partners, where also our export products, especially on tea, mineral products, some of the markets in the Middle East are our largest markets, And so those risks combined pose a risk not only to inflation, but also potential economic activity. Hence the reason why we emphasized on that risk in this statement. On the question asked by the student of Kigali Independent University, and we thank really the students that continue to participate in these MPFSS. On your first question on whether increasing the central bank rate solves inflation, the central bank rate alone does not solve inflation. But if you take the example of what we've seen and measures we've taken when we had record inflation in 2022 and 2023, the central bank rate at the time over that period was increased by 300 basis points. It had come from the low central bank rate, which had been decided to boost the economy during COVID and a year after COVID at 4.5%, and we increased our CBR up to 7.5%. So it contributed to curbing inflation, but there were additional measures taken by government, especially on making sure that we increase agricultural production, which also helped in solving inflation. Here, the inflation risks that we see are more on the energy core and energy inflation. And here, what we signal in central bank rate is to say we want, and we are committed to bring back inflation between 2 and 8%, but we also continue to engage, as I mentioned, other stakeholders to make sure that policy measures that need to be taken to bring back inflation are taken. And one example would be, how do we mitigate the rise of energy inflation? How do we make sure that agriculture season B and C have a strong performance to really make sure that we don't see any upward pressures on food inflation? And then the link you made to the trade deficit. It's true we still have a large trade deficit, but it's not increasing as fast as in the previous years, and this has a direct impact on the stability of the Rwandan franc. And when the Rwandan franc is stable, our import bill, because we import mostly in US dollars, is actually, I would say, contained. And so ultimately, the prices translated in Rwandan francs are also contained. And so the stabilizing of the Rwandan franc is the one that is going to also have an impact on imported inflation. And overall, all those measures, including measures that were taken by the central bank to reform the domestic foreign exchange market, to remove any speculative tendencies, but also reduce unnecessary demand of US dollars. All those factors lead to the path we're seeing forward of easing inflation for the second half of the year, unless the risks that we've identified materialize. But in that case, all the measures are also taken. Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, Governor. In the interest of time, we'll take one round of 3 questions.
Sure.
Thank you. There's a hand here in front.
Mwakoze Governor wa Beneri kuri presentation nziza muduhaye. Iduhaye icyizere u Rwanda rwacu kuntu ruhagaze muri bino bihe bitoroshye. Ariko cyane cyane icyo nashakaga kumenya yana n'amatsiko kuba ari hano bose, uko isi yose igenda ihungabana kubera intambara ziri hirya no hino, n'ubukungu bwacu buragenda buhungabana. Uretse imports zonyine dukura hanze na exports ziragenda zungabana, ko turabona indege ziragenda zihagarikwa hirya no hino, na tourism nayo ikaba affected. Ibi bikanganisha kumva ngira ngo tugeze ibihugu bigomba kwigira. Ejo bundi twabonye sanction America ishyira ku gihugu cyacu cyane n'abasirikare bacu. Sanction ishobora kugenda zigakomeza zikajya no kuri economic sector. So ikibazo cyane navugaga twabigenza dute kugira ngo dushobore kwigira tudakomeje gutegereza kuko imihano. Benshi babivuzeho n'imibare mwatweretse twabonye cyane bijyanye no muri agriculture ko imibare ikiri hasi kandi economy yacu yishingiye kuri agriculture. si ibyo nashaka kumenya cyane cyane, ndimo ndafokasinga kuri manufacturing and mining, value addition. Iyo turebye amabuye yacu y'agaciro amenshi aracyajya hanze adatunganijwe, none turabona indege ziyajyana nazo zigenda zigira ibibazo, n'abayagura nabo cyane cyane muri Middle East murabona ibibazo bihari. So ubu nibazaga nka Central Bank cyangwa se na Ministry of Finance strategies zihari kugira ngo izo sectors zibone attention, kubona value addition kuri minerals zacu, gushyira ingufu muri manufacturing sector. Ubu dufite ibibazo cyane cyane nk'ibintu bikorerwa mu Rwanda, dufite ikibazo cya packaging. Packaging ni ibibazo muzi ko twaciye ubushashi, ariko usanga ibicuruzwa bivuye hanze yenda biza bigifite izo materials, ariko ibyakuruye mu Rwanda ugasanga packaging ni ikibazo. Take an example nk'abantu bari gukora nka mattresses, ubundi muzi mattresses ko ari amashashi bashyiramo iyo bamaze kuzikora, ariko twarayaciye ugasanga mu Rwanda ni ikibazo cy'abantu bagerageza kujya muri manufacturing, packaging mugasanga irabahenze. So sinzi deliberate attention ishobora kubaho muri financial sector, bakagenda bakangurirwa izo sector kuziha attention, cyane cyane ndibuka muri mining previously twari dukifite ikibazo tugana amabanki, ngira ngo nabonye CEO wa BK ari hano, tugiye twaganye BK ngira ngo na BRD, turi uburyo financial sector batangira gutinyuka mining sector. Harimo ikibazo kubona amashanyarazi muri mining kugira ngo bimprove production, tugira amabuye menshi abe processed hano, mu gihe habaye ibibazo hirya no hino dushobore kwihaza. So nashaka kumva niba hari any strategy kugira ngo financial sector zaba banks zaba microfinance uburyo zagana mining sector zikagana manufacturing sector. Indi sector numva nayo tutajya duha attention kandi yakabaye tureba cyane mu bihe nk'ibi ko tubona isi yose itangiye guhungabana, ni ibintu bijyanye na chemical industries. Chemical industries zigira linkage to very many industries mu gihugu. Duhere hano mu myenda twambaye twese ikena chemicals, izi ntebe twiceho zose, aya macupa dukoresha y'amazi byose bikena chemicals. Ibi ni ibintu bihugu byose usanga byimportinga hanze, kandi ibihe nk'ibi turimo bikagorana. So ngira ngo birakenewe kugenda dukangura financial sector zacu kugenda zikanguka izo sector, kugira as time goes on tugende tubona import substitution. Igihe byakomeye nka kino gihe bakadufatira ibihano, murabona Amerika ko igihe cyo mu munsi mike kabifasha ibindi, nibura tubihari provision dufite mu gihugu cyacu tugomba kwihagaraho. Wigiye kureba nk'ibintu bijyanye na petrol, ubu sinzi mu gihugu niba dufite at least nka 4 months of imports dufite storage za petrol mu gihugu. Aha naho dukeneye strategies kuzanamo investors bashobora kugira ibigega byinshi, dushobora kuba parking nibura byakomera, twaba dufite nk'amezi 6 twaba duhunitse dufite mu gihugu cyacu. So hari sector rero zikeneye kwitabwaho, tugakangura financial sector zacu kugira ngo zitinyuke. Niba ari ibintu bishyashya yenda sinzi, ubundi twagiraga BDF ari kurikirana, ariko niba BRD afatiye attention ku buryo izo sector bajya bakangurira muri financial sector bakagira nizo product nshyashya bakazigishwa bakazimenya. Usanga inyinshi zishayingawe kuko zitazumva, nka mining batinyaga ngo harimo risks kuko batazumva neza bakanga kujyamo. Ngira ngo igihe kirageze kugira bakangurwe bumve ko nazo ziri profitable kandi zatanga umusaruro ku gihugu cyacu. Murakoze.
Hari ikibazo nigeze kubona inyuma.
Good morning. I'm a student of ULK, Kigali Independent University, a year 3 student of economics. And I would like first of all to start by the fact that I really appreciate the presentation. The presentation was clear and concise. And thanks to that presentation, I got 4 questions that I would like to get the answers. And all of my questions are directed to the governor. My first question is, given that the real estate sector has a low NPL of 2%, why does it hold only 5% of the credit sector? My second question is, like, given that public pension contribution increased by 122.4%, could you explain me what the government is doing with the funds? Is Rwanda using a pay-as-you-go system or an investment-based system? My third question is, from an investor perspective, what are the main macro risks in Rwanda today that could affect long-term investment decision? And my last question is, given that the financial share assets increase up to 68%, what are its potential effects on investment, financial stability, and economic growth? And for the governor, the last, if you were to advise a developing country on how to increase its FSA, what would you say? Thank you so much.
We had one last hand there. Thank you. There's a hand. Microphone, please.
Thank you. My name is Uda Kunsu, a student at Kigali Independent University. I have two questions mainly. One is about price stability. The other one is access to financial services. I am from Rwanda district, but we have been facing the issue of financial services. We have 17 sectors, and you can find that in each sector, there is no bank agents, only maybe 2 or 3 mobile agents. And you have said that you have reduced Musako to 13, so it took us to pay the student fees. You have to travel either to Gichum district or you can travel to Butaro district. For me, even the transport is difficult. You have either to walk around to 5 hours or you take a motor of 7,000 francs, which is not fair. So how do you even redistribute the financial services? My other question is, we have been heavily impacted by the crisis from the Middle East. What are the National Bank efforts so that we can stand against those crises? For example, one of my colleagues said that stocking, which is a good idea, instead of always saying that we import what we are going to use, why not stock in those times of crisis so that we can, as one, stand against those crises, fight, even the prices can be stable, kind of, because the impact of those wars may affect energy products, even agricultural chemicals, because in the district that I'm coming from is mainly comprised of agriculture. In terms of agricultural seasons, the fertilizers prices are very high, which discourage many people want to go through agriculture sector. Even assessing the credit to agriculture is difficult, because in my sector we only have one sako, even their funds sometimes are limited. You go there, they tell you that our funds are limited, so maybe you can wait to this, which affect the agricultural season, because most of the time agriculture depends on the climate, and climate changes over time. May you please help us do even redistribution of financial services, because I have seen that many financial services, banks, SACCOs are located in urban sectors, but the countryside areas are neglected.
Thank you very much.
If I could ask which district you're coming from to be able to address your question. Watubwira district you're coming from?
Burera district, Ruhunde sector.
Burera? Yes. All right, thank you.
I hand over to you, Governor.
Yes, so we'll start with responding to the questions by Director General RCA. Yabajije ikibazo mu Kinyarwanda uko rushaho gushyira imbaraga mu bikorwa bituma twigira kandi duhangana n'ibi byaba izi mirwano tubona ku isi cyangwa se ibibazo bigenda bigaragara bishobora kugira ingaruka ku bukungu bwacu. Aha naza gusaba Deputy Governor kugisubiza. Hari then questions from the ULK student on real estate sector financing versus their non-performing loan ratio, the use of increased contribution in public pension funds. Here our acting Executive Director for Financial Stability, Bernard, will respond to it. And then the impact of our macroeconomic context to long-term investment decisions. Here the Chief Economist can also comment. And then on and then I'll respond to how developing countries or strategies they can take to increase their financial sector assets to GDP. The last question was on access to financial services, especially in rural areas. Maybe let me answer that. First, I believe there's been a lot of efforts that government has made to make sure that every Rwandan can access financial services from where they are. You might remember that the Umurenge Sacco, when they started, was to make sure that every Rwandan can access financial services in their own sector. The 416 Umurenge Saccos, I believe even in Burera district, there's no sector that doesn't have Umurenge Sacco. That is one. Second, for mobile money operators, they have a large network of agents, especially in rural areas, but we do acknowledge that some areas are not yet fully served by especially digital channels or agent banking. But one of the, I would say, the evolution is that we cannot expect banks to continue building branches across, but more to turn into using digital channels to make sure that everyone has access to financial services. And so we look specifically into Burera districts, whether we don't have enough agents, being banking agents, mobile network operators, agents. But in terms of SACCO, and I know Burera is also among the districts which have seen automation fully rolled out in their Umurenge SACCOs, and secondly, the district SACCO also being consolidated. So if there were any issue on access to financial services, particular to Burera, and I'm glad also the governor of the northern province is here, then it's something we would look at. Lastly, Burera is also among districts where we are conducting this Jedana County initiative to really promote the use of digital financial services, starting with women, but we're extending it to the youth as well. So I've seen the student is both a woman and a young person, and so for her peers who are not at university, there are also initiatives that the central bank is conducting. And I want to also give assurance that Burera districts, in the top 3 districts from 2024 FinScope that are financially included, Burera was not among them. So I'm a bit surprised that we still have some areas where there's no access to financial services. Top 3 were mainly Nyaruguru, Nyamasheke, and then in Eastern Province it was Ngoma, Northern Province was Rulindo, which we prioritize in our campaigns, but to reassure the student from ULK from Burera that also Burera and all rural districts are a priority for Central Bank in financial education, but also local government in financial inclusion initiatives that they have. On price stability, also to reassure the student that our country has always had strategic reserves, being food strategic reserves, but also petroleum products strategic reserves. The government because we know there are always going to be crises. This has been a long-standing policy and strategy, and making sure that those strategic reserves can always be used in times of crisis. And we've seen that through the different crises we've had, being COVID, being also in the period of high inflation, food strategic reserves, whenever there's an area where there's not sufficient agricultural production because of drought or floods, those strategic reserves have always been used. So there's comfort that if there was need, even in this year, those strategic reserves would be put to good use by government. I will stop here and then give the floor to Deputy Governor ku bibazo byabajijwe na DG RCA.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Governor. I feel actually part of, in the responses that you've given, do also apply to the question that was asked by the DG of RCA. Kwigira is quite broad. Yo numvishi ikibazo wabajije, it really touches on all sectors of the economy. You talked about mining, you talked about tourism, you talked about the financial sector. Now, my take is this, DG. You asked, are there plans? Actually, plans are there. They are short-term, they are medium-term, and they are long-term plans. If we reflect, shocks will be there. The most important thing is that there is adequate planning that has happened. We do have now Vision 2050, and in its implementation, we got now to to NST1, and we are now talking about NST2. So in terms of planning of how we have sustained, inclusive, and those two words are very key. You talk about sustained, inclusive economic growth. If you have sustained, inclusive economic growth, then it also gives you the ability to withstand shocks. Because shocks do come. And Rwanda has demonstrated capacity to deal with shocks in the past and in the present. Now the call is to each and every one of us in our respective roles. Can we have consistent, and underline the word consistent execution of the plans that are there? So in briefly, Governor, I would say plans are there that speak to sustained inclusive economic growth. If you have sustained inclusive economic growth, it gives you ability to withstand shocks as we've withstood them in the past and as we withstand them in the present and in the future. The call to each and every one of us is to identify our respective roles and have consistent execution on the plans that are at national level and are the plans that speak to institutional level. Thank you.
Bernard?
Thank you, Governor. On the question from Stephen, mainly on the real estate, we see real estate growing in Rwanda, and real estate developers also have different projects in which financial sector is financing. That's why you'll see that they are among the top finance sectors. In terms of performance, yes, real estate is among also the sector that are performing well because their NPL ratio is below our benchmark of 5%. And as the sector is growing and real estate developers coming to Rwanda to invest, we'll continue to monitor this business, but when it comes to the performance, we don't see any concern about their performance, as still we see that their NPL ratio is still below our benchmark. On the question of the pension, public pension, how are they being contributed? We see that the pension contributions in public pension are increasing, and mainly the increase was because we know that last year there was an increase in contribution, but also the methods of contributions are also digitalized. This digitalization can also contribute the contributions performance. But also, as the labor market is growing, we also still see the contributions being increased, and these contributions also will assist retirees to be sustained in their future when they are no longer on the labor market. Thank you.
Yes. Then Thierry, on how macroeconomic indicators influence long-term investment decisions, finally.
Yes, thank you, Governor. On that question, I would say that long-term investment, one of the main factors or drivers of long-term investment is macroeconomic stability, as I was saying. The role of the central bank is to ensure price stability and financial sector stability, which is really an important part of this macroeconomic stability. To relate that to one of the questions that were asked before, this is why the Monetary Policy Committee is really committed to maintain inflation within this band of 2 to 8%, and in the medium term achieving 5%. So if you look at the long-term investments and what we see, the recent developments, and even the recent past, the past few years, we do not see really risks on the macro side regarding long-term investment. If anything, the data that we are having now coming from our foreign private capital survey, which is available on our website, is showing that we have, for the case of foreign direct investment, we have more and more foreign direct investment into the country, surpassing always higher than our estimates. The recent data show that in 2024, for example, we reached inflows of FDIs, including, around $873 million. And these foreign direct investments are mainly coming to sectors like manufacturing, financial services, ICT, construction, and real estate. So in a nutshell, this trend has been growing, and we see 22% increase in 2024. We expect this trend to continue 2025, 26, and 27. They are really, with the high growth that we are seeing, inflation contained in the medium term, we do not see major concerns on the macroeconomic side for long-term investment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, distinguished guests, the academia that has been very active in this morning, our distinguished panel. Thank you for the insightful engagement, for the questions. We really appreciate. In the interest of time, we request you to continue the conversation as you continue engaging with our documents. Let's appreciate our panel with a round of applause as they take their seats. So like I said, we encourage you to continue engaging with the documents that we are going to put up on our website and on our different social media platforms. That is the governor's presentation. We also have a detailed booklet on the MPFSS. And for any clarification and questions, you can write to us on our different social media platforms. So as we end our session this morning, allow me to take this opportunity to invite the Honorable Deputy Governor to give us his closing remarks. Deputy Governor, you're welcome.
Given that all protocols have already been observed, in the interest of time, please allow me to say, distinguished guests, good morning. Let me begin by conveying, on behalf of the governor and on my behalf, on behalf of the team of NBNR, our sincere appreciation for your presence and your thoughtful engagement. The quality of this morning's discussions reflects our shared commitment to safeguarding Rwanda's macroeconomic stability and advancing sustainable growth. In the governor's statement, I believe there were 3 core messages that she concluded with. 1, the strength and resilience of our financial system in the face of global uncertainty. 2, the discipline and responsiveness of our monetary policy in maintaining price stability while supporting economic activity. And 3, our continued emphasis on innovation and financial inclusion as foundations of long-term resilience. Going forward, we want to assure you that sound policy will be matched by sustained collaboration. We will continue to act with vigilance, with clarity, and with purpose, carefully monitoring developments and deploying necessary instruments to preserve stability and confidence in our financial system. In conclusion, I extend my sincere appreciation to the Governor for your steadfast leadership and to the entire team of NBNR for the rigor that underpins today's statement. I also want to thank all stakeholders present for your continued partnership and trust. And I want to say to you that together we will sustain the progress achieved and reinforce the foundations of a stable and inclusive financial future for Rwanda. I thank you and I wish you all a productive afternoon.
Distinguished guests, as we conclude this March 2026 MPFSS, allow me to leave you with this small statement. The strength of our economy will continue to depend not only on sound policy, but on continued dialogue, collaboration, and shared responsibility among all of us. Allow me to once again appreciate the Honorable Governor for the clear and insightful presentation. A round of applause for that, please. You're now invited to join us for a networking session. Please feel free to talk to someone that you don't know in the room. Ask them what they do, where they work, and you never know, maybe that person is the person you needed to solve 1 or 2 things at work. So, finally, we value your feedback. We are here and we have reached the steps that we have reached, or we have come this far because of the feedback that you give us. So your feedback is valued. I request you to kindly scan the QR code and share your thoughts on the clarity and delivery of today's presentation. It's just a few questions, so please scan the QR code. Thank you. So to our media partners, we'll have the press conference in this room in 15 minutes after the close of this session, so please be back on time. And finally, on behalf of the National Bank of Rwanda, thank you once again for your presence, your engagement, and your continued commitment to Rwanda's economic progress. I thank you and have a blessed day.
Thank you, Honorable Governor of the National Bank of Rwanda, for your time. Muri uyu mwanya tugiye kugirana ikiganiro n'itangazamakuru. Bari kumwe natwe muri presentation. Ariko turaza kubasaba kwivuga itangazamakuru mukorera n'ikibazo cyawe. Ndaza gusaba yuko tugerageza tugahina ibibazo byacu dufite kugira ngo twese tubashe kubona umwanya wo kubaza. Reka dutangire. With your permission, Governor, we'll take a couple of questions. And then let's start over here. Your name, media house, and your question.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Your Excellency, the Governor, and the DG. My name is Juliana. I'm from 103.5 Capital FM. And I have about 2 questions. One is how does the central bank balance inflation control with economic growth compared to what you told us earlier here? And another one is, I know I've always asked this a million times, but I can't stop because it concerns women, and it has to do with if there's any way to reduce the lending rate to women particularly, and the youth, if that's possible, if it can be discussed and thought about, because usually it's the lending rates that are problematic to women and the youth. Thank you.
Thank you. I will take, yes, Peter. Your name, media house.
Yes, Murakoze, Your Excellency Governor, sorry. Nitwa Peter Nizeyimana, ndi editor wa Taarifa Rwanda. Ndagira ngo mbabaze, hari inkuru tumaze iminsi twandika ijyanye n'ikibazo cyavuzwe muri banki ya Equity cyo kwibwa miliyari nyinshi z'amafaranga y'u Rwanda binyuze mu byo twakwita fraud. Ese kiriya kibazo mwarakimenye, kiri muri Equity gusa? Icyo kintu cyo kuba hari abajura bashobora kwinjira muri banki nini zo mu gihugu bagatwara amafaranga abaturage baba barazibikije, gihagaze gite? Murakorana mute n'izi nzego kugira ngo kitazongera kuba? Murakoze.
Murakoze Peter, reka dufate ikindi cya nyuma kuri uwo murongo.
Murakoze, nitwa Moses Kwishimwe from Royal FM. Ikibazo cyanjye ndakibaza mu Kinyarwanda, ni ikibazo ndagaruka ku ntambara iri kubera mu burasirazuba hagati. Ikibazo mfite ndibaza nti ese ni zihe ngamba zihari mu kurinda ko ingaruka zikomeza kugera ku budahungabana bw'ubukungu bw'u Rwanda, dore ko mu minsi mikeya twari twabonye hari inkuru nari nabonye ivuga ngo abikora ngo bamaze guhomba ngo amafaranga niki menshi agera muri miliyoni 100, bavuga ngo kubera iyi ntambara iri kubera mu burasirazuba hagati. Twe twatekereza tuti none se ni izihe ngamba zifatika mu buryo bufatika muri gufata kugira ngo ingaruka zidakomeza kuba nyinshi? Murakoze cyane.
Yego cyanyuma Gatete.
Murakoze cyane, nitwa Eric Gatete, umunyamakuru RBA. Ikibazo cyanjye ntabwo gitandukanye cyane n'ibindi, ariko hari insight nshaka kongeramo. N'ubusanzwe mu bukungu bwacu dusanzwe turi BOP deficit, cyangwa se ibyo twohereza hanze bisanzwe ari bikeya kurusha ibyo tuvana hanze. None turi muri ibi bihe by'iyi ntambara mu burasirazuba bwo hagati. Mu by'ukuri ukwihagararaho kwacu uyu munsi, ubwo ndahera kuri iyo BOP, ariko nakomoze cyane cyane kuri ya stock y'ibijyanye n'ibikomoka kuri peteroli. Yo duhagaze dute, twakwihagarara igihe kingana iki mukurikije ibyari bihari, gikomatanye n'ibindi bisubizo byagiye bishakwa, by'umwihariko gucuruzanya hagati y'ibihugu bya Afurika nk'isoko rya SFTA, ndetse na use of electrical vehicles, by'umwihariko ko nibyo bikenera cyane ibikomoka kuri peteroli peteroli gucuruza hagati y'ibihugu dukemura ikibazo cya BOP hagati ya Afurika nka muri SFTA ndetse no gukemura ikibazo cy'ibikomoka kuri peteroli dukoresha electrical vehicles birakemura ikibazo ku ruhe rwego mu kwikije no kwihagararaho dufite. Murakoze.
Urakoze cyane, ngira ngo dushobora gusubiza ibyo ngibyo Governor, then we'll take another round of questions.
Thank you for the questions. Murakoze ku bibazo byiza mutugejejeho. Ndahera ku kibazo cya Juliana Capital FM yakibajije mu Cyongereza. And so on what first question was on how we link the central bank rate, especially when we increase it, to economic growth. I would say these are two different angles of one solution, meaning how do we create a sustainable economic growth for Rwanda? You cannot have sustainable growth if you have volatility in prices, if you have very high inflation, and that is valid for all economies. So our role as central bank is to ensure price stability, meaning that the increase in prices should be at a level that we deem optimal to sustain economic growth. And that optimal inflation rate from studies that we've conducted has been in the medium term to have an inflation of around 5%, which is why we always have a band of between 2 and 8%, which is essentially 5% minus 3% or plus 3%, and have headline inflation that varies in those two, in that band. Whenever we have inflation or pressures on inflation, showing that the inflation is going to be above our upper bound, so above 8%, it's important for the central bank to start taking monetary policy decisions that allow us to come back to the optimal level of inflation. That's what happened in not only August, when we were seeing that for the remainder of the year, we were seeing inflation getting close to 8%. There was a slight increase of central bank rate by 0.25% from 6.5 to 6.75%. Then in the recent Monetary Policy Committee meeting, our projections show that the first half of 2026, inflation is going to be above 8%. And we're seeing it starting from December inflation. Inflation was at 8%, January 8.9%, and February 9.2%. And this showed that our forecasts were actually closer to what the reality showed. Very, I would say, high inflation, but not as high as the record inflation we had in 2022. Therefore, our decision to say, let's increase the central bank rate to make sure that we can bring back inflation between 2 and 8% by the end of the year. However, the central bank rate that we currently have, 7.25%, is actually lower than the highest CBR we had when we had those inflation in double digits. So we have no concern that it will hurt economic growth. If anything, the economic growth numbers we've had for 2025, 9.4%, very strong performance, show that the monetary policy decisions are actually there to make sure that we can have that sustainable growth. Importantly, and it's the last point, is the coordination between the fiscal policy and monetary policy, which are essential for Rwanda to make sure that all macroeconomic indicators are stable while continuing to achieve our ambitious economic growth targets. For NST2, it's at 9.3%, very high growth, one of the highest, not only in Africa, but in the world, and still having price stability. So those two imperatives have to go hand in hand. On your second question, reducing rates for women and youth. It would be inaccurate for financial regulator to say we're going to regulate rates, especially for underserved segment of the population, and you're absolutely right. Women and youth are still lagging behind in the usage of financial services, although the gap is shrinking over time. For women and youth to access finance, the main barrier remains access to collateral, to be able to even have credit before we speak about the lending rates. And so different initiatives in terms of providing guarantees for women and youth to allow them to access credit, with 75% of that credit guaranteed by the former BDF, now BRD, is one of the initiatives to make sure that they can access credit. Second, which I would say is equally important, is financial literacy. For women and youth to benefit from financial services at the same level as men, although in Rwanda we know also that overall the population is not accessing credit or saving at the levels we would wish, is to make sure that we put in place programs that provide our population with skills on how to manage finance, to get awareness of all the products that are available on the market and how they could serve them in building their financial well-being. We are quite confident from the progress we've seen over the last, I would say, 16, 17 years. As more people have accounts, then, which is always the first step in financial inclusion, then you start using that account for other services. You start getting access to credit, meaning you're building assets. You need protection for those assets, but for you to know which type of insurance that will protect your asset, there has to be efforts by insurance companies, by government, by central bank, to also come to you as a citizen to explain to you why this product is fit for purpose. And so these are a number of initiatives that we believe, with targeted interventions on women and youth, will allow them to get access to loans. And the more borrowers you have, then the economies of scale will play. More volume of loans, more volume of savings that contribute to reducing lending rates. As you've seen, they're reducing. They used to be 5 years ago 17% on average. Now we're coming towards 15%. There's a lot of efforts to get to what some of the private sector players ask us: can we have single-digit lending rates? I am glad that BRD, for instance, is working towards having some loan products at 11% now, now getting closer to 9%. So the journey is long, but there are initiatives in the right direction. On the question, ibibazo bibiri, hari icyabajijwe na Tarifa ku kibazo cya frauds. Watanze urugero kuri Equity Bank, ariko frauds nk'uko tugenda tubigaragaza kubera gukoresha ikoranabuhanga, tubona yuko hari frauds zishingiye kuri serivisi z'imari zikoresha ikoranabuhanga, ariko izo frauds ikigaragara nuko mu mibare cyane cyane imyaka 2 ishize umubare wa fraud waragabanutse, aho zari zigeze kuri cases 5,000 mu mwaka wa 2024, ubu cases twabonye ko zagabanutse zigera ku 3,000. Kuvuga rero ko nta fraud muri serivisi z'imari zishobora kubaho, aho byaba ari ukwibeshya. Ni nko kuvuga ngo ku isi ese hari umunsi hatazaba abajura, ntago bishoboka. Ariko ahubwo icyo umuntu akora ni ukuvuga ngo twirinze gute nk'ibigo by'imari nk'igihugu kugira ngo n'ubwo bujura butoroka ku ikoranabuhanga tubukumire, kandi n'igihe bubaye habe ingamba zo kugira ngo ayo mafaranga agaruzwe kandi n'ababigizemo uruhare bahanwe. Aho rero no muri case ya Equity ibyo birakorwa. Tarifa ivuga ngo ni miliyari nyinshi cyane, ntago ari byo, ariko kuba ari case ikikurikiranwa n'inzego zibishinzwe, ntago details twazitanga iyo investigation itararangira, ariko amafaranga amwe yaragarujwe. Ikindi nuko nka banki nkuru y'u Rwanda dushinzwe kumenya ko mu gihe habaye fraud runaka mu kigo cy'imari, uwo umukiriya byagizeho ingaruka agomba gusubizwa ayo mafaranga mu gihe kitarenze iminsi 7, kandi ibyo birakorwa. Ikindi nuko ibigo by'imari bifite ubwirinzi buhagije, n'ubwo umuntu atavuga ngo nta bujura buzabamo. Ikindi cyanyuma narangirizaho ni ukuvuga ngo iyo tubonye mu kigo cy'imari hari abashinzwe gucunga uwo mutekano w'ikoranabuhanga cyangwa kuba bashyize ingamba zikaze kugira ngo birinde fraud, ibyo bitakozwe nabo babazwa izo nshingano. Mu gihugu cyacu buri wese abazwa inshingano. Ibyo rero ni bimwe muri measures tubona ko zatumye izo cases za fraud zose mu bigo by'imari zigabanuka, kandi uko dukomeza kubaka ubushobozi bwo kwirinda no gushyira imbere umutekano w'ikoranabuhanga, dufite icyizere yuko nubwo fraude zagaragara zihita zimenyekana, ababigizemo uruhare nabo bakabibazwa, kandi ubwirinzi buri no muri banki nkuru y'u Rwanda bureberera ibigo by'imari byose dufatanyije n'ikigo cy'igihugu gishinzwe umutekano w'ikoranabuhanga NCSA, byerekana yuko aho tugeze nta mpungenge twagomba kugira ko nuko dukomeza gukoresha ikoranabuhanga muri serivisi z'imari ko fraude ziyongera, ariko no mu gihe ibaye hari ingamba zo kugira ngo ayo mafaranga agaruzwe n'ababigizemo uruhare babiryozwe. Royal FM wabazaga ku kibazo cy'uko tubona iyi mirwano iri mu burasirazuba bwo hagati ingaruka bishobora kugira ku bukungu. Umuntu yavuga ko kubera ko iyi ntambara irimo kubera muri Iran no mu bihugu bw'uburasirazuba bwo hagati, ubu ni cyumweru cya gatatu, ingaruka ya mbere twabonye ni ku biciro by'ibikomoka kuri peteroli ku masoko mpuzamahanga, byiyongereyeho 43% kuva iyo ntambara yatangira kugeza uyu munsi, n'ibiciro bya gaze. Aho rero niho tubona ko bishobora kugira ingaruka iyo ntambara ikomeje ku biciro by'ibikomoka kuri peteroli ku isi hose, ariko no mu Rwanda. Ikindi ni uko kubera ibicuruzwa byinshi binyura mu burasirazuba bwo hagati, hagiye habamo imbogamizi y'uko ibyo bicuruzwa bikomeza guca cyane cyane muri iriya Strait ya Hormuz. Nabyo ubu ingaruka ntabwo umuntu yavuga ngo hari imibare twashyiraho, ariko ibyo bicuruzwa bidakomeje gutambuka kuri iyo Strait ya Hormuz naho bishobora kugira ingaruka ku bukungu bw'isi no ku bucuruzi, guhahirana n'amahanga. Ku rwego rw'u Rwanda rero ni ibintu dukurikirana nka banki nkuru umunsi ku munsi, ariko ntabwo ari twe gusa, na Minisiteri y'Imari n'Igenamigambi, Minisiteri y'Ubucuruzi ndetse n'izindi nzego zibanza kugira ngo zirebe se nk'u Rwanda dufite ibikomoka kuri peteroli bihagije. Ibyo twabizeza ko bihagije, kuko hari n'ububiko bw'ibikomoka kuri peteroli buhoraho, kugira ngo hagize ikibazo cyatuma ibikomoka kuri peteroli bitagera mu gihugu, ubwo bubiko bube bwakoreshwa ku buryo abantu cyangwa se n'ibigo by'abikorera ndetse no cyane cyane mu rwego rw'ubwikorezi hatagiramo ingaruka. Kandi si ubwa mbere tubonye iyo mirwano ku isi igira ingaruka ku bukungu. Muri iyi myaka 5 umuntu yavuga ko yaba intambara ya Ukraine, yaba igihe cya COVID, buri gihe hari ingamba zagiye zifatwa kugira ngo ubukungu bwacu butagira ingaruka ziremereye, kandi n'igihe biri ngombwa, nk'uko mu mwaka wa 2022 na 2023 guverinoma y'u Rwanda yatangaga nkunganire kugira ngo igiciro cya essence cyangwa mazutu kitiyongera cyane. Izo ni zimwe mu ngamba leta yiteguye gushyira mu bikorwa kugira ngo ubukungu bwacu budahungabana, hataba n'ingaruka haba kubikorera cyangwa se n'abanyarwanda muri rusange. Ikibazo cya RBA kuri trade deficit ndetse n'ububiko bwa peteroli byo nabishubije, wenda ku cyuho hagati y'ibyo twohereza mu mahanga n'ibyo tuvanayo nasaba Kasayi akagisobanura. Kasayi ni umuyobozi ushinzwe politiki y'ifaranga muri Benin.
Koze nyakubahwa Governor, arakoze ku kibazo yabajije Gatete. Ansabye ko negera imbere. Ikibazo yabajije kiri mu bice bibiri. Icya mbere yabajije atese ku bijyanye n'icyuho cy'ibyo tuvana mu mahanga n'ibyo twoherezayo, ese turabona iyi gahunda ya CFTA hari icyo yafasha? Yego, hari icyo yafasha, nubwo atari yo yonyine yakemura icyo kibazo, kuko ibyo twohereza mu mahanga n'ubundi ubwo na Afurika nayo iri mu byo twohereza mu mahanga, ariko byafasha mu karere muri rusange, noneho n'u Rwanda rukaba rurimo, ko hari ibyo twajya tuvana mu bihugu bimwe na bimwe, byaba ibyo dusanzwe duhahirana twegeranye mu karere, ariko n'ibindi bihugu biri kure. Ibyo rero bishobora gufasha ko tutagira icyo umuntu yakwita pressure mu koherezanya nangwa mu guhahirana n'andi mahanga ya kure nk'uko twabibona muri Afurika, kuko icyo gihe iyo havuyemo n'imisoro y'ibyo byari gukorwa na transport cost nazo zikagenda zigabanyuka, ibyo byose birafasha. Ariko igifasha cyane ni ingamba zagiye zishyirwaho na leta. Nk'uko mubizi hari ingamba, hari ibyo tujya twita made in Rwanda, twese turabizi. Ibyo nibyo bishobora gufasha mu gihe kirambye, nubwo nibyo bindi bifasha, ariko kuba u Rwanda rwongera imbaraga mu kongera umusaruro w'ibyo dukenera hano mu gihugu, ariko n'ibyo dushobora gusagurira amasoko, ibyo nibyo bishobora kugabanya icyuho. Hari ikindi kibazo wahuje nacyo ubaza utese ku bijyanye n'imodoka zikoresha amashanyarazi, ukanabihuza no kuba byafasha mu kugabanya icyo cyuho. Nabyo byagabanya ku gice kimwe, kuko ahanini politike y'imodoka zikoresha amashanyarazi ntabwo ari ku bijyanye n'icyuho kiri hagati y'ibyo twohereza mu mahanga n'ibyo tuvanayo, ahanini ni ku bijyanye no guhumanya ikirere. Ariko nabyo hari icyo byafasha, kuko nubwo imodoka zikoresha amashanyarazi ziva hanze nazo zigurwa hanze, ubwo nazo n'ubundi hari amadevize akenerwa kugira ngo tuzizane hano mu Rwanda, ariko amashanyarazi dukoresha yo nibura amenshi aba yo atatumijwe nk'uko dutumiza peteroli. Ibyo rero hari icyo byagabanya, ubwo icyaba gisigaye ni ugutumiza izo modoka, kandi nabyo ntabwo ari ibintu twavuga ngo ni ibintu bizarangira vuba, kuko na culture shift nayo irakenewe. Murabyibuka ko kera hari abantu batinyaga imodoka za automatique ngo iyo zipfuye ntizisunikwa, n'amashanyarazi hari abakizitinya bati ntabwo wayijyana mu mihanda mibi. Ubwo ibyo byose leta yashizeho ingamba zo kugira ngo ni nko kwigisha, akavuga ati imisoro iravaho, bikaba byatuma abantu bakangurirwa kubikora, bigafasha muri ibyo byo guhumanya ikirere. Guhumanya ikirere bikaba bike, ariko nanone nk'uko wanabivuze n'ibyo gutumiza peteroli hanze nabyo bikagabanyuka. Numva ariko nasubiza ibyo bibazo bye Gavana. Murakoze.
Murakoze cyane. Ngira ngo tugiye kongera gufata ibindi bibazo, reka duhere hano imbere. Amazina yawe, itangazamakuru.
Murakoze nyakubahwa Gavana, nitwa Emeline Mbabazi, nkorera Radio Disi na TV10. Mwari mumaze kubikomozaho mu kanya nka zimwe mu byo mubona bishobora kuzaba ingaruka iyi ntambara iri mu burasirazuba bwo hagati ikomeje kubaho. Ibyo byose biri kuba n'ubundi turi kubona ibiciro mu Rwanda ku masoko bikomeza kwiyongera, ndetse mu kwezi kwa kabiri twabonye byarazamutse ku kigero cy'9.2%. Ni iki mwabwira abaturage kirimo kirakorwa kugira ngo nubwo izo ntambara ziri kuba ndetse n'ibiciro bikaba birimo birazamuka bareke kugira impungenge, cyangwa se bizere ko mu minsi iri imbere tuzabona ibiciro ku masoko bimanuka cyangwa bigabanuka? Murakoze.
Murakoze.
Thank you. My name is Michelle. I work for the New Times. One of the panelists said the real estate sector is performing well. What are the factors behind this growth? Because we know some affordable housing projects were progressing at a slow pace. Of course, the real estate sector comprises so many projects, but what are the major projects are we talking about? What are really the indicators in your assessment? Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We have a hand here at the back.
Thank you so much. My name is...
Murakoze cyane, nitwa Olive Iragena, nkorera Radio na TVO yahoze ari Authentique. Ndagaruka ku byo bagenzi banjye bagarutseho kuri iyi ntambara n'ubundi iri kuba. Nashaka kubabaza, mwatubwiye ko ingaruka mwatangiye kuzibona, nize ngaruka zihariye ku gihugu cy'u Rwanda. Hanyuma ikindi, abaturage baravuga ko iyi ntambara ishobora kuzabasiga mu kaga gakomeye. Message yanyu ni iyihe nka Beneri? Murakoze.
Murakoze. Yes, William. Last.
Thank you so much. My name is William. I work with RBA. I have two questions. One is coming from the earlier presentation in the statement where you highlighted that there is a risk in energy inflation. Mine is on coordination on energy price shocks. Definitely, on several of the presentations, you usually say that it's only one institution cannot have solutions. What sort of coordination is needed, especially from all sectors or all actors, to sort of deal with the price shocks, but also in your mandate to control the inflation and ensure that the financial sector is stable? What is your tolerance? Your projections say that the inflation is expected or unexpected to sort of keep on the rise for the next 6 months or for the first few quarters. So how far can you be stretched in terms of tolerance? The other one is basically a concern. From where I sit as a journalist, I've noticed that many of the people do not relate with some of this information. And majorly it's because of either how it's communicated, that people do not understand this. In such times, especially to the chief economist, if we've agreed that we are not, it's not business as usual, what sort of message should every Rwandan, especially the ordinary Rwandans, in terms of behavior change, what sort of communication do you make to prepare these people in terms of behavior? If the inflation is this, probably sort your budgets like this. What sort of message do you give them so that at least there is an understanding from all levels? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Governor will take those questions.
Murakoze, ndahera ku kibazo Emeline yabajije. Radio 10 gisa nicyo yahoze ari Radio Authentic, ubu yitwa Radio O. Yego. Kuko ni birajyanye, ni ukuvuga ngo iyo tubonye, nabanza gusobanura, iyo tuvuze ngo umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro kuri 9.2%, ntago bivuga ko uwo muvuduko nugabanuka ukagera muri za mbago za kabiri, hagati ya 2 n'8% ko ibiciro bizaba byagabanutse. Icyo bivuze ni uko ibyo biciro biba bidakomeza ku mpuzandengo y'ibiciro muri bijya mu gatebo k'umuguzi. Ni ukuvuga yuko ibyo biciro ku mpuzandengo bitakomeje kwiyongera kuri icyo kigero. Aha rero icyo twabwira abanyarwanda ni uko ingamba zafashwe na Banki Nkuru y'u Rwanda zo kuzamuka inyungu fatizo ya Banki Nkuru, ariko nanone n'izindi ngamba zigenda zishyirwaho na leta kugira ngo ibiciro byaba iby'ibiribwa byaba iby'ibikomoka kuri peteroli bidakomeza kuzamuka. Ibyo ni ibifasha kugira ngo umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro ugaruke muri za mbago hagati ya 2 n'8%, kandi tuba dushaka ko bitarenza uwo muvuduko utarenza 5%. Aho rero ni ukubabwira ko izo ngamba zirahari, haba kuba na leta irimo kureba cyane cyane ibibera mu burasirazuba bwo hagati n'ingamba zafatwa kugira ngo tubonye koko ibiciro by'ibikomoka kuri peteroli ku soko mpuzamahanga bikomeje kwiyongera, nk'uko twabivuze bikarenga ya madolari 100 ku kagunguru ka peteroli cyangwa se na gazi, ibiciro byayo bikomeza kwiyongera nk'uko twabibonye muri ibyumweru 3 bishize. Ingamba n'ubundi zari zashyizweho mu gihe ibiciro by'ibikomoka kuri peteroli byari byiyongereye mu mwaka wa 2022, nabyo byakongera kurebwaho kugira ngo ibiciro ku isoko ry'u Rwanda bidakomeza kuzamuka. Ikindi gihoraho ni ukugira ngo turebe ko umusaruro w'ubuhinzi n'ubworozi nawo ukomeza kwiyongera kugira ngo ibiciro by'ibiribwa bidakomeza kwiyongera, kuko nibyo bifite navuga igice kinini mu inflation cyangwa muri uwo muvuduko. 27% by'izamuka ry'ibiciro biba byavuye muri ibyo byaba ibikomoka ku ngufu, harimo essence, mazutu ndetse n'igiciro cy'amakara, ukongeraho iby'ibiribwa iyo byongerewe cyane nibyo bigira ingaruka cyane cyane ku muturage, aho rero niho izo ngamba zongera gushyirwa mu bikorwa. Ikindi ni uko twabahumuriza ko ntabwo ari ubwa mbere tubonye iyo mirwano ku rwego rw'isi ishobora kugira ingaruka ku bukungu bwabo bw'isi bwaba ubw'u Rwanda, duhereye mu mwaka w'ibihumbi 2020 aho hari covid, nyuma yaho hakaza intambara ya Ukraine, nyuma hakaza imbogamizi zari mu bucuruzi ku rwego mpuzamahanga, ndetse byanateye izamuka ry'ibiciro bikabije. Muribuka ko hari igihe twari dufite umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro uri hejuru ya 20%. Ingamba zari zafashwe icyo gihe mubona ko zagiye zidufasha umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro ukongera kugaruka kuri 4.8% mu bihumbi 2024. Aho rero nk'igihugu duhora twiteguye kandi tunoza izo ngamba kugira ngo koko ibiciro ku masoko n'umuvuduko wabyo udakomeza kwiyongera birenze cya gipimo cy'8% aricyo kiri hejuru tureberaho. The question by Michelle in New Times on real estate and construction sectors. This I can ask the Chief Economist Thierry to comment on them. Then there was a question by William RBA on coordination that's done with different institutions to limit the impact of energy price shocks. Here, Deputy Governor can come back to it as well. And then the behavior change when we see high inflation, Deputy Governor can also comment on that. So the question by William, one on coordination done to mitigate the energy price shocks, and then the one on which behavior change can we recommend to the population in case of high inflation. So we'll start by Deputy Governor, then Chief Economist.
Thank you, Governor. Indeed, you are right. In different interactions we've had, we keep saying and will continue to say that the central bank will use the tools at its disposal to ensure price stability and financial stability. And we also say it's not the responsibility of the central bank alone. It calls for coordination with other government institutions, but also with the private sector. So that continues. Specific on energy, there is coordination that is happening, that is being led through the Prime Minister's office, that involves the Minister of Trade and Industry, that involves the Minister of Finance, and other key stakeholders. And it's looking at how do we create buffers to absorb shocks that we see. There are also efforts that are being led in terms of energy, I would say, in creating more energy independence. And those are being led also through the Minister of Infrastructure. So there is coordination. There is coordination in terms of policy. There is coordination in terms of raising funding. And there is coordination working with the private sector on how the execution happens. As it's always been said, government creates an enabling environment, and then you look at the private sector to bring in capital and the ability to execute. So that coordination is ongoing, and it will continue to be, because these are long-term, I would say long-term investments that have to be done. Now, to the question that you ask around behavior change, I think it starts one with awareness. It's very important, and that's why this engagement with media is very important, so that you can, working with your partners in creating awareness to the general public. Because without awareness, then there is speculation. At times they're saying, I've always felt that there is perception that can be real or not. And most often, without clear information, the perception is not real. So the first behavioral change that we would say is we want to continue to interact with you so that we can create awareness. Right now, you walk around even in a salon and someone will say the Iran conflict is impacting, so I need revised pricing, but is it correct? So with appropriate communication we are communicating that government, the central bank, is monitoring this situation. There are buffers and there are ways, learning on experiences we've used before to deal with previous shocks, because it's not the first time as a country we're experiencing shocks. We've managed and we will manage. So that's one. Two, it's also to ask, we have to always go back to say, but I as an individual, me as Nick, you as William, what's my role? Am I delivering on my role in my responsibilities, but also in helping others? I feel that's the second behavioral change that needs to happen. Same way the government does, then at an individual level, we also need to prioritize. Now that you have information, now that you are aware, at an individual, at family level, how do you prioritize priorities? There are times you would say, maybe this, I need to do less of it, or I need to postpone. So I feel in terms of behavioral change, that's what we would say. Remember something that Professor Kasai mentioned. For example, we are all aware that the government has put in place initiatives to promote electric mobility. But is everyone going that path? There is the education that needs to happen, the awareness that needs to happen, and then taking individual family decisions to say, I need to do this because there is an opportunity cost to it. Governor, I want to come back to, I know you really responded to it, but I want to come back to the issue, the question that was raised by Juliana. And I want to come back to it because as a central bank, we do care about it. The funding to women and youth. Now, this is an invitation to you, Juliana, and the other members of media. Certain banking institutions have come up with products and services that respond to that need. The challenge we have today is there is not sufficient awareness. I want to name a few, and I'm not here as a central bank deputy governor to promote one institution over another. No, it's in terms of creating more awareness. For example, A&M Bank has products, single digit, that are speaking to women who are in business. EcoBank, BPL, BK. So the invitation to you as members of the media is interact with them so that you can help create the awareness. There is still a problem, but there is concerted effort to respond to it. That's one. Two, we need to also appreciate that, and I keep going back to this in different instances. Funding is not only debt, and I will repeat that. Funding is not only debt. Even if we are to create situations of single-digit funding, it will not be sufficient. So we need to continuously explore opportunities of other funding structures that can speak to the excluded, who are the youth and women. And again, there are some solutions that are there. They might not be, and they are not sufficient. But the biggest question, the biggest challenge is even those that are there, there is not sufficient awareness about them. So again, invitation to not only you, Juliana, to all members of the press, can we identify them and create awareness of them? And then we can be able to appreciate they are not sufficient. How do we now increase them? Governor, those are the responses I wanted to provide. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Thierry.
Yes.
Real estate and construction sectors.
Sure. Thank you, Governor. As the question is about real estate, but really real estate sector is very much related with the construction sector. The construction sector has been one of the drivers of our growth for the past 5 years. As we speak, the numbers published by the National Institute of Statistics were showing that this morning we are also showing that growth GDP growth was 9.4% in 2025, and the construction sector growth was 10.9%. So you can see that it's a very important sector for our economy. Construction sector, the construction phase, it employs, it's one of the sectors that employ many people, but this construction is coming from public infrastructure and private infrastructure. So now how you link it with the real estate is mostly the private infrastructure. I mean the private construction projects that are here in town, may it be buildings for headquarters of financial institutions, headquarters of international institutions, buildings, commercial buildings. We also have apartment buildings, new houses, and at the end of the construction project, these buildings, these houses, these apartments are being, they are rented by people, by businesses, and this goes into the real estate activities. So this is how we capture that in the GDP, and that's how, that's what are the drivers behind, if I can say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Governor. With your permission, we'll just take 2 questions, and then we'll conclude. Yes.
Murakoze, Honorable Governor. My name is Bertrand Mnyazikuye. I work for African News Agency. My question goes about agriculture, and I was asking about coffee and tea remain central to Rwanda's export earning and rural livelihoods. How is BNED integrating volatility in global commodity prices into monetary policy decision to safeguard microeconomy stability? And second question goes like, how does BNED view the role of coffee and tea sectors in promoting inclusive growth, and what financial policy are in place to ensure smallholder farmers benefit from financial system stability? My last question goes like...
Can we keep, so that others can ask. Let's just keep it to those 2. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Honorable Governor.
Let's take those 2.
Thank you, Madam Governor, and your team for the insightful conversation we had this morning. My name is Wycliffe Nyamasege. I work for EGA. My question regards Iran. We have seen the conflict that is happening there. The focus has mainly been on oil prices, but we know that most of our African countries here depend heavily on fertilizers and fertilizer supply from that region. So my question is, how will the crisis affecting this food production and inflation, and how do you assess the potential impact of the crisis on food production and inflation, and what are you doing to mitigate the situation? Thank you.
All right, thank you. Last one. Microphone iriho.
Murakoze, Governor. Nitwa Nzeyimana Viateur mu kinyamakuru Rwanda Dispatch Magazine. Ikibazo cyanjye kiragira kiti, ese ko u Rwanda rwacu ruriho rufatirwa ibihano uko bwije uko bukeye kubera ibibazo nyine bihari, ese nka BNL cyangwa ni BNL ihagaze mu gusobanurira abanyarwanda cyangwa mu gusobanurira abanyarwanda uburyo muzakomeza kubungabunga ifaranga ry'u Rwanda kugira ngo ridakomeza guta agaciro mbese ku buryo bwirukanka? Murakoze.
Murakoze cyane. Ngira ngo dushobora cyanyuma.
Murakoze, nitwa Thierry Ndayishimiye Isango Star. Ikibazo cyanjye ni kijyanye n'umusaruro mbumbe. Muri presentation mwagaragaje ko ubuhinzi mwagaragaje ko ubuhinzi buza ku isonga mu byatumye umusaruro mbumbe uzamuka. Mu gihe gishize hari abahinzi bagaragaje ko bahinga badakoresheje ifumbire kubera ko ifumbire iri kuzamuka.
ibyo ngibyo bikafekta ko umusaruro w'ubuhinzi ushobora kuba muke. Mu bigaragara ubuhinzi umusaruro urazamuka, ese habayeho ingamba zo gutuma ifumbire igabanuka cyangwa se ikongerwamo nkunganire ku muturage w'umuhinzi? Hari uburyo beneri yashyizeho cyangwa se uburyo bwo kugabanya icyo giciro mu mibare igaragara mu gihe kizaza byatuma ubuhinzi bukomeza kuzamuka no gutanga igisubizo ku bijyanye n'ibiciro bikomeza kuzamuka? Murakoze.
Murakoze cyane. Yango reka dusubize ibyo ngibyo. Murakoze mwese.
Yes, I will ask maybe Bertrand to repeat the first question. I didn't quite get your question on tea and coffee and macroeconomic stability.
Yego murakoze. My first question was, coffee and tea remain central to Rwanda's export earnings and rural livelihoods. How is Benin integrating volatility in global commodity prices into its monetary policy decision to safeguard microeconomic stability?
Yeah, thank you. That's clear. On that question, you've seen that our exports for 2025 increased by 11.9%. And one of the major drivers has been exports of coffee, both increase in volume, but also the prices of coffee on international markets. And the way we use that data to inform monetary policy decision is the impact, obviously, of our trade deficit or our export market versus what we import, on the stability of the Rwandan franc, but overall economic growth. So the fact that we are seeing, one, export crops increasing both in volume and value, but also agriculture overall performing well with a growth of 7.4%. That is an indication that for smallholder farmers, their income is increasing and they had enough production for their own food security, but the national food security. Whenever we have a performing agricultural sector, we see it automatically in food inflation. And as I mentioned, food inflation is one of the core components in the consumer price index and contributes a lot on our inflation. So food inflation is something that we monitor closely, but in particular export crops to look at also dynamics on our external sector, as well as export earnings that have an impact on the stability of the Rwandan franc. All that is compounded and used in our monetary policy. So today we are confident that the performance of the tea and coffee sectors to increase foreign exchange revenues for the country, but also most importantly the well-being of farmers when prices on the global markets are high. That gives a positive picture and outlook for those two crops and export crops. Now, smallholder farmers' access to finance, it's improving, especially when we see the financing provided by microfinance and SACCOs, which go mostly to smallholder farmers. However, it's not yet enough. And there are different initiatives that we talked about in this session to increase access to finance for farmers, to also reduce the time it takes for farmers to access loans, even when they are approved, and to lower their cost. Secondly, there's on the insurance side, insurance protection or the National Agriculture Insurance Scheme, where government pays up to 60% of the premiums for farmers to access insurance, which is a very good initiative to lower risk for the agriculture sector, but for smallholder farmers to be able to be compensated in case their crops are damaged, if there's drought, for instance, or even floods. So that insurance scheme is there to protect them. So that's what I can say on that question. On the question from Wycliffe, on the Middle Eastern conflict and impact on the supply of fertilizer, it's one also of the concern because fertilizer or ingredients used in chemical fertilizer to produce chemical fertilizer. Majority of it comes from Middle Eastern countries. For now, because fertilizer are always imported ahead of the agricultural season, we don't see an impact on season B or C. However, where we will continue to monitor is whether there's any impact of fertilizer supply for season A, which starts in September. But the Ministry of Agriculture, again, is already looking ahead. And as a country, also, we diversify sources of fertilizer. And whenever one region is impacted or has a shock for any reason, there's always ways to get access to raw materials, products that we were bringing from the Middle East. But it's yet too soon to know whether there's an impact, because no one knows how long this conflict will last. But as a government and as a central bank, we don't wait for that uncertainty to act. Is already to look at different options in case the conflicts last longer. I think there were two questions by Viateur on the stability of the Rwandan franc. I think we can appreciate from the statement that the Rwandan franc has been stabilizing since last year, where we had a depreciation of 4.4%, and the main drivers, yakibaje mu Kinyarwanda. Ndagisubiza mu Kinyarwanda. Ifaranga ry'u Rwanda hari imyaka ishize cyane cyane igihe hari haba ingaruka za COVID cyangwa se ingaruka z'intambara ya Ukraine, aho idolari rya Amerika ryazamutse cyane, aho twabonaga ko ifaranga ry'u Rwanda ryataga agaciro kagabanukaga ku kigero cy'18%, aho ni muri 2023, cyangwa se 9% mu 2024. Ariko umwaka ushize turabona ko iryo gabanuka ry'agaciro ntago rikimeze nk'iyo myaka, aho ryari kuri 4%, kandi n'ubu muri aya mezi 3 ya mbere y'umwaka murabona ko niyo mugiye ku masoko za forex bureau cyangwa mu mabanke, ifaranga ry'u Rwanda riri stable, ntago rigita agaciro nko mu myaka yashize, kubera ko n'idolari rya Amerika naryo ntago rigikomeza kuzamuka. Kandi ikindi cyagaragaye nuko ibyo twohereza mu mahanga byariyongereye, ibyo bituma hinjira amadovize menshi, ndetse haba n'ubukerarugendo, haba amafaranga yinjizwa n'abanyarwanda bari muri diaspora bayohereza mu Rwanda, nayo yarazamutse. Hakaba kandi nuko hari amavugurura cyane cyane ku isoko ry'ivunjisha no gukoresha amadovize. Amabwiriza yavuguruwe y'ikoreshwa ry'amadovize, aho ubu ngubu abasaba kwishyura mu madovize batabyemerewe, hari ibihano bikaze byashyizweho. Kandi tunasobanurira abanyarwanda ko ikoreshwa ry'ifaranga ry'u Rwanda nta muntu ugomba kubasaba gukoresha amadovize mu bintu bashobora kwishyura mu mafaranga y'u Rwanda. Aha nabyo rero tubona byaragize umusaruro bitanga kugira ngo ifaranga ry'u Rwanda dushobore gusigasira agaciro karyo. Ikibazo cya nyuma, Isango Star mwabajije ku rwego rw'ubuhinzi. Urwego rw'ubuhinzi nibyo nk'uko ubukungu, umusaruro mbumbe w'igihugu wiyongereho 9.4%. Urwego rw'ubukungu rwa mbere rwagize uruhare muri iryo zamuka ry'umusaruro mbumbe ni urwego rw'inganda, urwego rwa serivisi ndetse n'urwego rw'ubuhinzi. Aho mubaza mutese nk'abaturage bavuga ko ifumbire ihenze, nka Banki Nkuru y'u Rwanda aho ntago biri mu nshingano zacu, ariko Minisiteri y'Ubuhinzi n'Ubworozi muzi ko hari inkunganire itanga ku ifumbire, ubwo ni leta ibinyujije muri Minisiteri y'Ubuhinzi n'Ubworozi. Ariko twebwe mu nshingano zacu zo kugira inama mu by'ubukungu guverinoma, iyo tubonye ko hashobora kuba ibibazo mu rwego rw'ubuhinzi byatuma umusaruro udahaza cyangwa se ibiciro by'ibiribwa bizamuka, izo nama turazitanga, byaba ku byerekeranye na inputs, byaba ku by'imbuto cyangwa se ibiciro by'ifumbire, ariko no kureba uko nanone duhangana n'ihindagurika ry'ikirere. Aha niho iteganyamibare ryacu rifasha kugira ngo muri izo nama dutanga tuziha guverinoma twerekana aho tubona umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro ugana, ikizabitera, noneho ingamba zikenewe kugira ngo ibyo umuvuduko w'izamuka ry'ibiciro utarenga wa 8% bishyire mu bikorwa, kandi ni ikintu gikoraho dukomeza gukora.
Murakoze cyane nyakubahwa guverineri. Ibyo bikaba bitugejeje ku musozo w'ikiganiro n'itangazamakuru. Tukaba tubashimiye kubw'umwanya wanyu kandi tunashima n'inshuti zacu mu itangazamakuru n'abafatanyabikorwa, tubifuriza umunsi mwiza. Murakoze cyane. The mic, can we have the mic on? Yego.
Nagira ngo dusoza nongere nshimira abanyamakuru ko aribo badutumikira kandi banadufasha no kwigisha mu byabo by'ubukungu cyangwa se imari abaturage, kandi tubizeza ko nubwo iyi press conference irangiye ababa bafite ibindi bibazo abakwegera communication team yacu tugakomeza kubisubiza. Murakoze, tubifurije umunsi mwiza.